to today's City Council meeting. We're grateful to have you join us. As you probably have seen, we've been holding electronic meetings due to the ongoing practice of social distancing. Today I'm wearing a mask because I have with us, or with me in the office, Cindy Gus Jensen, the City Council Executive Director. We appreciate the high level of interest in the events and community conversations that have been happening these past couple of weeks. In the midst of national and local civil unrest and outrage, the City Council has received voluminous comments relating to the systemic issues which allow racism to continue to impact our communities. The comments have covered the spectrum of options, and we want to reassure the public that the council members value and recognize that each comment is a voice from the community that deserves to be heard. For anyone from the public who has submitted comments, your comments have been forwarded and shared with all council members and will be added to part of the public record. The largest portion of comments have been related to the police department budget. To allow us more time to discuss this, we've scheduled a follow-up discussion regarding fiscal year 2020-2021 police department budget. Due to, again, the high level of public interest, we want to be sure everybody knows how to remotely participate in our meeting today. Although conducting our meetings electronically is different from our familiar in-person meetings, this is still considered an open and public meeting. For the work session, we welcome members of the public who may be watching our usual live video feeds on the City Council's agenda page, YouTube, Salt Lake City Television, or Facebook Live. Although there is no public comment during the work session, you can also join us for our 7 p.m. formal meeting to share any comments that you might have. And of course, your feedback is always welcome. You can reach us by mail at P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah, 84114-5476, or email us at council.comments@slcgov.com, or by calling our 24-hour phone comment line. The number for that is 801-535-7654. We'll now move on to our work session items. Our first item is an update from the administration on the status of local emergencies. So with us, we have Mayor Aaron Mendenhall, Chief of Staff Rachel Otto, and Chief Administrative Officer Lisa Schaefer.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This is Rachel here. Thanks again for allowing us to have some time on the agenda each week to talk with you about these updates. I'll keep it super quick today unless council members have specific questions, but last night I received this week's batch of more localized data for Salt Lake City zip codes from the County Health Department and forwarded that on to you all. If you haven't had a chance to review it, it was characterized in the by the county's epidemiologist as showing a kind of a pretty visible, steady decline. Nothing, not extreme, but we're I think really for the first time kind of seeing an actual decline. This I feel like it could be viewed as an improvement as to what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, although it still seems like we're seeing some unsteadiness in the 84116 zip code. So the last conversation I had with County Health regarding that zip code in particular, it was indicated to me that it's going to just take some time based on different testing levels and outreach that's being targeted towards that zip code and some of our other hotspots in town. So at this point, the governor, as I know you all know, extended the status quo for last week through June 12th at midnight. And so we've remained in the orange. We haven't really had a chance yet to talk internally on the administrative side about whether we would make a recommendation to remain orange into next week, or whether we might make a request or get advice from County Health to downgrade our status to yellow. So as always, as council members have particular thoughts around that status, I'm open to hearing those, of course. And I think beyond that, we've got the council extended the emergency status for COVID through July 10th, and the administration has been considering an additional one or two additional measures that we may want to talk with you about to implement between now and July 10th. But I want to make sure that we're on the same page and doing things that you guys feel good about before I introduce them to you and before the mayor signs them or anything like that. So I haven't had a chance to do that, which is part of our desire to collaborate with you on these emergency measures. So once I do that, we'll get those done and get those out into the public as soon as we possibly can to take any additional actions that might make sense at this point. So I think that's all that I really wanted to make sure that I talked about today, but would welcome any questions.
Thank you, Rachel Otto. Any questions from council members? Anything that Mayor or Lisa Schaefer want to add? Okay. Oh, sorry. Hi, Lisa. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
I didn't have anything to add. I just wanted to let everyone know that we don't have any additional updates on status of buildings following the earthquakes. But if any of you have questions or receive questions from constituents or citizens about that, please feel free to bring those forward.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to the next item on our agenda, which is previous year's legislative intents and interim study items. So with us for that, we have Allison Rowland, City Council Policy Analyst, and Randy Hillier, Department of Finance Senior Budget and Policy Analyst. And then we also have a long list of other people from pretty much looks like every department available in case we have follow-up questions there. So Allison, do you want to lead us through or start us off?
I'd be happy to, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. I can do a quick introduction to help explain what legislative intents are for some of you who are having your first time seeing them. And then we could go through, if you like, I know we're a little short on time, but we could go through each one of the legislative intents. I would suggest I just read out the title of the intent, and then if any council members have concerns about the staff recommendation, then I'd be happy to either talk to them offline or you could discuss it during your meeting. Will that work?
Yes, that's okay.
Okay. So what we're looking at now are the administration's responses to the legislative intent statement that the council statements that the council adopted last year with the FY 2020 annual budget. Some of these responses are out of date, of course, because there was a transition from the previous administration to the current one. And with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of city focus had to shift toward emergency responses rather than working on things like legislative intents. So some of this information may be outdated. Other parts of this information may just need an update, even if, or may no longer be accurate. How's that? There's an annual schedule for legislative intents, and that's included in the staff report as attachment C1. There are also attachments that have the full text of the open legislative intents. That's in attachment C2. And the full administration responses that are listed in the FY21 Mayor's Recommended Budget are found in attachment C3. So the chart I suggest we go through summarizes the current status of each of the legislative intents and includes council staff recommendations to either leave the legislative intent open or to close it. For the recommendations that the staff suggests closing or to consider closing, we've also included whether the item would then be considered complete or might continue indefinitely as a policy change. Of course, all of these decisions are up to the council, and so we just hope to hear your information. I would suggest that if we don't hear anyone raising a concern about the staff recommendation, then we'll just go ahead with the staff recommendation. But of course, you're always welcome to contact staff outside of this session if you look at one later and realize that doesn't actually follow your interest. I also want to mention that there are legislative intents that are pending from fiscal year 19, 18, 17, 16, and 15. So all of those are also listed in the chart that's in the staff report. And I'll go through that now unless there are questions.
No, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just read the title and the status assessment that is recommended by the staff. For FY20, A is golf, food, and beverage options, and that we recommend remain open. B is fire department medical response team. We recommend close and continue. C, police uniform allowance, open. D, park ranger program, close and continue. E, funding our future. There are 4 items here. Unspent funds, affordable housing allocation for the Northwest Quadrant, housing program outcome report, and new sales tax funds for public safety. We recommend these remain open. F is building rehabilitation projects near HRCs, open. Complete streets definition, open. H, traffic calming, close and continue. I, economic development position, close and complete. J, crossing guards, open. K, fund balance floor, close and continue. L, sustainability, rate increase, close and complete. M, green team metrics, open. N, holding accounts. There are a bunch, 4 here. ADA administrator position in community and neighborhoods, traffic calming initiative, funding for equity training and other coordination. And I will skip down to 4, which is funding our future housing programs. Each of these actually has a separate recommendation, which you can see on the right side of the graph, but I will skip those unless anyone raises a concern and move on to the FY19 legislative intent.
Councilmember.
Thank you. I guess for both N and A, B, C, D, H, why are we closing and continuing the traffic calming study? I know that this came up in the budget a bit ago, but I guess really my question is, what does it mean to close and continue? Because nothing's been done on the traffic calming, and I know that it has been a priority in the past for several of us. So I guess I'm just wondering what that means and looks like for the future.
And I think our thought on that was that because the specific funding of $100,000 that was allocated in the FY20 budget was or is intended now, according to the council's vote, to be used to hire a consultant to develop the citywide traffic calming implementation plan, that specific intent could be closed, but that it would continue in the sense that that continues to be the council's direction for the use of that money. And if there are additional related intents, then we can certainly add them. But again, this is just our recommendation.
That makes sense.
Oh, I believe you had another as well, Councilmember Fowler. Was it oh, I see. It was traffic calming in the holding account as well. Same idea.
Councilmember Valdemoros, did you have your hand up? No? Okay, Councilmember Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at D, the Park Ranger program. We had previously voted as a council to incorporate that into the police department and have it as part of their patrol deployment, essentially. I think that's, for me, something we're going to want to revisit again in light of current discussions on the police department and scope. I don't know if keeping that open, Allison, makes sense through our discussions in the next little while with the police department budget and maybe some ripple effects across the other budget, or if we need to start something new. I'm just not sure. It looks like we're supposed to implement this fall, but I think we need to revisit that before then.
And I think, this recommendation was written several weeks ago, so it may be that a change is in order, completely up to all of you.
Mr. Chair, I'd recommend we keep the park ranger program open as part of our discussion about police department.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to propose a straw poll?
Yeah, I would propose for the council that we keep the park ranger program open as a legislative intent, with the understanding that we still want the ranger program to happen, but we need to talk about the police budget and how it relates to whether it should be in the police department at this point. Okay.
And then can I ask that at the same time that we say, with that exception, that we also poll that staff can go forward with all of their other recommendations as stated?
Unless, I would agree with that, unless there's somebody else who has any other questions.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
You might also want to specify for the FY20 intents, since we haven't gone through the FY19 and previous.
Yes. Sorry. So with the exception of the park rangers, which we would keep open, the poll is that all of the other recommended or staff recommendations for the 2020 budget we go forward with. So any questions about the poll? Okay, if you just indicate your support so I can see it. Looks like we have support from Councilmember Johnston, Valdemoros, Dugan, Mono, Fowler, Rogers, and I'm supportive of as well. So thank you. Allison, you want to take us through the next batch?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to. This was actually the largest batch, so the rest should go relatively quickly.
So Councilmember, oh, sorry, Allison. If you just, I'm going to be watching. If you'll just raise your hand if you have an objection to any of these, and then I'll call for a similar poll at the end.
So this is the FY19 legislative intent session, which is item B in the staff report. The first one is A, kind of inexplicably, but it's performance measures for homeless services funding, open. B, neighborhood safety program for HRCs, open. C, evaluate additional medical response unit in the fire department, close. D, streamlining the permitting process, open. E, prostitution outreach program, open. F, city-owned land inventory, open. G, fleet insurance for high-risk vehicles, open. H, funding our future housing program outcome report, open. I, funding our future new sales tax funds for public safety, close. J, general fund subsidy for golf, close or amend. Should I continue with the others?
Council members, since that one's an either or, do we want to, I think we probably should address that one right now. Councilmember Fowler.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor. Sorry. It's going to be a day, huh? I would also like to just look, as we're addressing that one, I do agree that we should probably address it, but also E, an update on that program. And that's it. Those are my only two concerns.
Which one was E again?
The prostitution outreach program.
Okay. And what's your, you don't want to keep that open, or you?
I guess I'm okay keeping it open, but I would like maybe an update on where the project is, if it's going, what's happening with it.
Okay. Anybody have an objection to keeping it open and then requesting an update from the administration? Okay, great.
Question, Mr. Chair.
Romano?
So if something's left open, doesn't that mean that we're still addressing it just by the nature of leaving it open? Or are we adding additional, is Councilmember Fowler asking for additional reports or like a specific, something a little more substantial?
Allison, do you want to answer that?
Not really. I think it's a fine line. I'm not quite sure. I think that both of you could be correct, but we could add a specific request to the administration for an update on the prostitution outreach program. I think it is likely with all the other things going on that the administration simply hasn't had the ability to make a lot of progress on this.
Okay. Councilmember
Chair.
Dugan? Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Dugan.
Then I request and we'd get updates on the other ones that the admin or our staff has said we should get updates on, like number D, streamline the permit process. I'd like to have an update on that process.
Okay.
So we could go ahead and request any of the updates that are suggested in the notes on the right side of the columns.
Okay. Councilmember Johnston.
I'm fine with all that, Mr. Chair. On item J, the general fund subsidy for golf, it's close or amend. I would intend on amending that sooner than later, but if we're okay with close or amend, I'm good with that.
Okay, anybody else have thoughts? I would probably favor amending rather than closing.
I would favor amending also.
Okay.
But I'm not sure what's the difference between amend and keep open.
Well, if we were to keep them open, it would just be open as is, but amending it, we can ask, we can change it a little bit based on the new data that we have. Whereas just keeping it open would be the same, it would be keeping it open as previously stated.
Okay.
Sorry.
My intent on amending, Dan, is that golf's got to be solvent right now. And so we have to do the general fund subsidy. But the previous administration recommended ongoing. And I think we need to amend that and have a broader plan for those properties with our parks. I'm not comfortable with just an open-ended statement. We're going to keep doing this indefinitely. That's why I would look to amend it. It doesn't change right now. We have to fund it. The debt payments have to be done through the general fund, or general fund through golf and then to the debt payment.
So perhaps, Mr. Chair, it would make sense to consider this one open and then also request, or rather ask you for time later on an agenda to talk about the amendment.
Yes, so I have open and amend golf, open and request update on prostitution outreach. And then I'm sorry, what was there was one other one that was raised.
The streamline the permit process, it's left open, but also get an update on that.
Right, okay. Okay. Okay.
Should I continue?
Yes, please.
Okay, FY18 legislative intent.
Or wait, no, I'm sorry. We need to do the poll on that one first. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So I think the straw poll, I'll just propose it, would be that we follow staff's recommendation that on all of those, except that we would keep open and amend for golf, and then keep open and request an update on prostitution outreach and permitting. If everyone is okay with that, please go ahead and show your support. Okay, I've got support from Councilmember Dugan, Johnston, Mono, Rogers, Fowler, Valdemoros, and I'm supportive as well. So that's unanimous. So let's, Allison, I'll turn it back to you to go through FY18.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So FY18, the first A is fund balance level, close and complete. B, secured parking on 500 West Green Median, open.
Okay, council members. Okay, so I'll just propose the straw poll then that we follow the staff's recommendations on those items. If you just indicate your support or non-support. I see support from Councilmember Dugan, Johnston, Mono, Fowler, Valdemoros, Rogers, and I'm supportive as well. So that takes care of 18.
FY17, A, administration, metrics, and reporting. Consider updating or closing. And these include metrics in conjunction with the annual budget and public services maintenance at city facilities. It also includes, I apologize, facilities division asset renewal and deferred maintenance study, and parks and public lands division electronic work order system. The parks and public lands division, we suggest a close and complete. We were able to get information from the parks and public lands divisions earlier. The other two, I think, A and A2 would be the questions.
Okay. Council members, how do we feel?
If we're going to have metrics, we should update them. So I'd like to have an update on the metrics and get briefed on them.
Okay. Do you want to, so would you want to make an amendment or just an update?
Consider updating them and then briefed on those updates.
Okay. Any thoughts? Anyone else? Okay, so Allison's, if we can just mark that one to keep it open and ask for an update, or wait, let's straw poll it. Is it everyone in favor of keeping that one open and then asking for an updated briefing and consider amendments at that time? See support from Councilmember Fowler, Dugan, Valdemoros, Mono, Rogers, Johnston, and I'm supportive as well. Okay.
Then there are just two others for FY17. One is fleet fund financial sustainability, that would remain open. And then cost analysis for development review team services, and that we recommend close and complete.
Any questions on those two items? Okay, then I just straw poll that we follow staff's recommendation on those remaining two. All those in favor? Councilmember Dugan, Mono, Fowler, Valdemoros, Rogers, Johnston, and I'm in support as well. So,
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I apologize. On the sheet on C, the cost analysis for development of routine services, it says open as a recommendation. Some just said it was closed as a recommendation.
Oh, whoops.
Sorry.
Allison?
If I heard that correctly, I apologize. There was a little bit of a interruption, but I think it was cost analysis for development review team services.
Yes, ma'am.
And our recommendation is to close and complete.
Okay. On the form I'm looking at, it said open. I just wanted to make sure I was reading it correctly.
That's just the parks and public lands metrics, I think.
So we're on FY17, number C. There's one that is similar below.
So I'm on page 10 of the staff report.
And I apologize, I don't have those page numbers.
Okay. I'm fine with it closed. I just want to make sure we were on the same page with what was here, so to speak.
And unfortunately, we haven't been able to confirm that yet. I'm sorry.
It's all right. On here, it says open. The administration indicates the cost analysis will be will be begun shortly by the finance department, but the completion date is not yet known. Indicates to me that it's planned to be done. It will be done. It's just not done yet.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
this is Randy Hillier. That one is still intended to be done. It's just something that we haven't been able to provide to the council at this point. If it remains open, that's fine with us. I think the intent that it remain open was what we expected.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll straw poll that one to keep it open. All in favor? Councilmember Johnston, Mono, Fowler, Valdemoros, Dugan, Rogers, and I'm keeping it open as well, so we'll make that one unanimous as well.
And I apologize for the confusion there. Two more. FY16 building permit fee cost study open.
Straw poll to keep that open. All in favor? Johnston, Mono, Fowler, Valdemoros, Dugan, Rogers, and I am as well.
Great. And then finally, FY15 maintenance of business districts open.
I propose a straw poll to keep that open as well. All in favor? Councilmember Johnston, Mono, Fowler, Valdemoros, Dugan, Rogers, and I am as well. So also unanimous.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. That's it. I appreciate all the guidance.
Thank you. All right, so let's move on to item number 3 on our agenda, which is Housing Stability Programs follow-up discussion. Allison Rowland will stay on to help us from the council staff perspective. We also have Lonnie Eggerson-Goff, Director of HAND, Jennifer McGrath, CAN Deputy Director, Marsha White, Director of CAN, and Brent Beck, CAN Financial Administrative Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I suggest that we ask the administration to lead this. There were some additional questions that the council wanted to consider, and I believe they're in the best position to respond to those.
Okay, great. Lonnie, are you going to take us through that, or?
Yes, Council Chair, I'd be happy to. I was just trying to verify whether the 9-slide presentation that we provided to council staff is available to be shown on the screen. If not, I could attempt to share my screen.
Give me one moment. I do not see that. Give me a second.
Thank you.
Bobby, if it's helpful, it was included in the packets last week as well.
In order not to hold us up, I'll continue to look for this. Lonnie, I'm going to pass you the presenter ability for now. You try to show it on yours while I attempt to locate this. I apologize about the inconvenience.
No problem. This is in our council packets too. So if we just want to follow along there, we can.
So I'd be happy to attempt to share the content. Let me see if I can make that work.
Okay.
Is that?
Yay. Yes, great.
Technology can serve us sometimes, right?
Yes.
So I would like to just thank you for the opportunity to follow up on this important topic. We have been working on many ways to provide housing stability to our community through this COVID-19 pandemic. And I would like to just do a quick run through of the information I have and then leave room and time for council members to raise the questions that you might have. My understanding is that this discussion will be focused on mostly one-time funding the council approved for use. See if I can make that change. We have been very appreciative that the council allocated funds to address the extraordinary need for immediate housing stability within our community. There are many safety nets that have been in place and are beginning to expire. For instance, the eviction moratorium that was on the state level. And we want to try and make sure that as we move forward, our vulnerable residents are of utmost importance and that we protect their housing. In response to council's direction, the administration has shifted the possible use of the Housing Trust Fund loan repayment balance, also sometimes called the revolving loan balance. And we have managed that within hand, and we anticipate use of new one-time general fund, $1.1 million. It's our hope that we can, during this conversation, outline the criteria for both rent and mortgage assistance, and then rapid rehousing programming. We would like to receive guidance from the council on your preferred community partners, just to confirm the ones that have been spoken of before, and the guardrails or criteria for those programs. It's important to note that while our internal staff have been reaching out to have conversations with our community partners, just to understand if they have the capacity or bandwidth to take on additional funding, that there have been no specific commitments that we've discussed with our partners. But the administration, again, we're seeking a guidance from the council on these parameters. Separate from the $1.1 million that is the focus of this presentation, the council can anticipate participation in selection of community partners to implement the anticipated Housing and Urban Development CARES, also we call it the HUD CV dollars. These funds will go through a competitive application process, and we hope and anticipate that these applications will be brought before the council at least in late June or early July as a transmittal. HAND is also working to identify housing stability needs that align with the Funding Our Future resources. The city re-released the Funding Our Future applications so that community partners could address modifications to the original requests. Those were based on mayor's recommended budget and to address COVID-19 crisis response as well. The requests received from the community partners will be discussed with the mayor. That kind of expedited reapplication process closed on May 31st. And as soon as the mayor and staff within HAND have been able to discuss those applications, then that will be brought before the council for a review. It is our intent to have, again, another transmittal for Funding Our Future specific to the council by the end of June or early July. So in preparation for the proposed use of these one-time funds, we have spoken with, like I said, 6 different community partners. And if council determines that this is the policy decision that you would like to proceed with, then we will continue on that path. Potential programming funded in and outlined in these slides could help prevent Salt Lake City residents from slipping into homelessness or remaining unhoused if they are already in that condition. As we are all aware, it is much more effective to provide housing stability while addressing the variety of issues our community is experiencing during this pandemic. The partners that are proposed for your consideration are recommended because they are trusted in our community and they have the skills and capacity to do outreach to our vulnerable members of our community. So some of those folks may not know how to seek assistance, but our partners are experienced in providing that. Housing is one of the key barriers that perpetuates inequities in our community, and by ensuring our community partners are targeting assistance to those disproportionately impacted, as Rachel mentioned earlier, by COVID-19, we can start to break down some of those barriers. The proposed implementation will give the city the ability to serve underrepresented residents, and all potential community partners have experience with outreach applications for assistance and counseling of residents who would seek this type of financial assistance. So if it's all right with you, I would just like to dive into the criteria. Note that on each side of these 3 slides, we've got the data sources that we have researched and discussed internally within community neighborhoods and in hand. Those data sources are shown at the end. I'm sorry if that is not coming through super clearly. The data sources are KMC Gardner Policy Institute, Housing Wire, Census Bureau Public Pulse Survey, and the National Low Income Housing Coalition Rent Assistance Report. We can provide those in full detail if that's wanted by the council. So coming back to rental assistance, proposed criteria. Sorry, I'm not a good navigator sometimes. Is everybody able to see slide 4? Okay, great. So for rental assistance, our proposed criteria would be, again, reiterating the partners would be Utah Community Action, Asian Association, and Catholic Community Services. The criteria that we'd like to propose is 60% of average median income, and the assistance would be at $1,500 per month as a cap. The proposal is that this would be 3 months for short-term homeless prevention assistance, and that there would be COVID-19 related temporary financial assistance. So this would be determined through an income verification based on the past 30 days. Typically, the income criteria looks further back into history, but in this particular time, we want to make sure we're addressing immediate needs. So I don't know that I would necessarily need to talk through each of the data sources, but I'd be happy to answer questions on rental assistance criteria. If those are there are questions right now. And Council Chair, I cannot see other than just you and the screen, so I apologize.
I believe Councilmember Johnston has a question.
Mr. Chair, if I could ask just about the data on the rental assistance. Help me understand how the guardrails were set in place based on the data you've got, Lonnie.
So this has been a topic of conversation since the early part of April, when we were beginning to understand that there would be significant impacts to our community members. As I said, the main or the first data set that we considered was provided to us on a very short fuse from Jim Woods at the KMC Gardner Institute. And we know that community members within our city there are many of them that are extremely low income, and that we wanted to make sure that we bolster up their very tenuous situation. Half of the folks that that Jim Woods described for us are within the vulnerable positions that are within service sector or other jobs that are really most prominent or possible for layoffs and long-term unemployment. Do you want me to go into more detail than that, Councilmember?
No, I think my question sort of was for those who are below, say, 20 or 30% AMI, someone there, are they at the same risk because they may be on fixed incomes that maybe weren't disrupted, but folks between 30 and 80% sort of, I wonder sort of where that window is of folks who would lose those types of jobs. I'm just wondering sort of how that fits. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, I'm trying to get my brain around the way that you're describing that.
Essentially, I'm thinking that 6% seems like a fairly reasonable threshold of AMI, right, for a max. There's no minimum down to 0. I'm just wondering if we have any data that says that folks who are on, say, fixed incomes, which is probably those below 20% AMI, who weren't necessarily working, so their checks didn't get interrupted by losing their job necessarily. If there's any data that says they're losing apartments versus folks just above them who were on fixed incomes, really full fixed incomes, who may have lost their jobs and their income, that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I have to just say, I do not know for sure how we look at the lower AMI, and the fixed income is a really good point, Councilmember Johnston, that those are things that I would hope that folks that are on those fixed incomes wouldn't have as much impact because they're stable, and that the US money would probably be in 30-60% more likely.
You know offhand what 60% is for a single person?
I had a feeling you might ask that, and I have
should know,
the
but I can't pull it up.
so I have 50% is 30,800. I'm sorry, I'm not good at math on the fly.
Okay.
It's
No,
it's
that's good. Thank you, Lonnie. That helps.
it's not a lot of money. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So Bobby, it looks like you have been able to pull up the slideshow. Is that being seen by others? I'm just going to assume that you can go to the next slide, Bobby, which is mortgage assistance. Magic. Thank you. So again, we are looking to the council for direction and support of our proposed partners, NeighborWorks, Salt Lake City, or Salt Lake, and Community Development Corporation of Utah. Similar AMI, 60% AMI or below. These would be forgivable loans, part of a 5-year owner-occupied repayment proposal, and just a very low interest loan option if folks were able to repay more quickly within a year. And we suggest up to $5,000 or potentially $1,800 per month for about three months. Again, very much related to temporary financial assistance and looking at the past month's worth of income for verification. We wanted to make sure that we addressed the thoughts about how we would target individuals that do not have access to forbearance or other mortgage assistance. And again, I don't necessarily feel like I need to read through all the data, but if there are questions on that, I'd be happy to answer.
I have a question. So Lenny, if you don't know how we're going to figure out who was able to get help from the banks, from their own lenders, then how do we know that how are we going to figure out that there's a need, and also how we're going to, and how many people are you anticipating that will need help with these funds?
So the last question of how many people, we don't know for sure, but we will rely on our partners that have interest that comes through the 211 mechanism. So folks are being directed to do that for whatever assistance they need, right? And so then the information that would be given to a potential mortgage holder would be they would be linked up to either NeighborWorks Salt Lake or CDC Utah, and they have the tools available to them to do the counseling related to an existing loan. And then that would be the mechanism for us to make sure that we're looking at data that shows they do or do not have other financial assistance available.
Okay. All right. It's just, and the reason why I ask is because, you know, we need some metrics, like more specific. We need to get a little bit more specific with this because it's an emergency. And if we're saying absolutely we want to help because we know there's a need, then
Right.
and then we want to know what the need is. And if we don't know, then I'm like, wait, what? We don't know who needs help, but we are, okay with using this money that, we're hoping that we're gonna get replaced at some point because we had other plans for it. So that's why I ask. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. And like I said, we are still working with our community partners. One of the things that CDC Utah has communicated to us just in the past few days is that they would anticipate the average would be about 4,500 people, or excuse me, $4,500 per household, and it would serve about 21 households. If they were to take a half of that 250,000 that we're suggesting for mortgage assistance.
Councilmember Rogers, you have a question?
I think that Lonnie was answering that though.
Oh.
Maybe you can answer that for me. Is how are you going to divide up this money into which program, the rental assistance and the mortgage assistance? How are you going to figure that out, or is it first come first serve, and how would you work that with the local groups that are going to help divvy up that money?
Sure. So as we talked about this on previous council agendas, we had proposed 750,000 total for the rent assistance programs, and that would be shared between Utah Community Action, Catholic Community Services, and Asian Association, all of which we've been talking with about how they would utilize direct client assistance, how they would work with those that come to 211 or other ways that they're going to be doing outreach like they typically would. For the rental assistance, there are going to be a higher number of households that can be helped by each of our partners, just because the amount of the dollar amount for that rent versus mortgage assistance can be a little bit lower and still keep people in their rental housing situations. So we are proposing the 750 for assistance and just splitting it evenly between the partners, and then 250,000 for NeighborWorks and CDC Utah to also split in half, just so that we can access different parts of the city that are the current clients or client areas for those partners. If the council would like us to do that differently, we're definitely happy to take that in consideration.
I have another question.
Councilmember Valdemoros.
With regard to that. So Lenny, do we have any information, any data from your department that you've gotten a lot of phone calls from people that are saying, I need help with rental assistance, I need help with my mortgage, this is an emergency. Do we know more or less how many people have contacted the city and your department so that we can say, yeah, there's actually a need out there, and this is how we can distribute it ourselves because we have other programs, but we have partners that they can do it.
So thank you, Councilmember Valdemoros. I do not have that data. I know that my staff are taking dozens of calls every day. Some of them are our current customers that we work with for rehabilitation loans or mortgage loans. But I would be happy to come back with a definite number of people that have called Housing and Neighborhood Development. And then I'm confident that our United Way partners 211 will be able to provide some more specifics. I apologize, I don't have that right now.
Councilmember Dugan.
On that same note, and then the division of it, it's basically 3-to-1 on the rental to the mortgage. And is that about the ratio of homeowners to renters in that income bracket? So do we have three renters for every?
Yeah, I do not know that statistic. I'm sorry, Councilmember Dugan, but I could definitely work with our data gurus within my team to get that information back to you quickly.
Yeah, that would give us a better idea if the ratio of the dollars is the right ratio.
Okay.
Councilmember Romano.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm interested in how some of the guardrails that we put on how the programs are administered. A few things. So for instance, if we're giving rental assistance dollars to 3 different community partners, how do we make sure that one household doesn't apply to all 3 and sort of capture more of those dollars rather than get it spread out? And then a second thing is, I think sort of one thing that we learned through the emergency loan program was figuring out how to reach out to diverse communities. So making sure that the applications are in multiple languages, that we're reaching out to people that might not be connected to traditional organizations like community councils or whatever that might be. What are some of the ways that we will expect those community partners to administer the program to make sure that they're spread out to as many people as possible and that they're spread out evenly among different sort of geographic and racial groups?
Sure. So part of the focus on having 3 different partners involved with this is to be able to reach different community members. The Asian Association has a focus, obviously, on a particular population, and Utah Community Action has worked with folks with all different kinds of language and translation information. And I know that 211 has, I don't know what the numbers are, but probably over a dozen languages available as people are bringing in questions. And we would be, as HAND, we would be the ones coordinating and receiving information about who is being assisted. And I guess I made the assumption that that would be something we, in conjunction with our partners, would be making sure that people weren't double dipping, so to speak. But we have not solidified the agreements with our partners, so we could add that as language that is very clear that we want to learn as things are being awarded.
And I guess one of my concerns is, I think with some of both ours, but also the state and federal programs for the sort of emergency business loans, I think one sort of unintended consequence was that the money ran out very quickly for all of those programs. And it seems like the businesses who were more connected to banks or had like an accounting system that was really robust, that they could get all of their reports done really quickly, those businesses had an easier time accessing the funds. But I'm not sure that those are the ones that really needed it as much as the ones that maybe had a harder time filling out the application. So making sure that the deadlines aren't prohibitive for people that don't have an accountant on hand that they can call or things like that. Some of those guardrails I think are really important to make sure this money is equitably spread.
Yeah, and so in speaking with, I've spoken with Maria Garcias and with Mike Akalo, the directors for CDC Utah and NeighborWorks, and their staff is already very accustomed to doing outreach in an appropriate fashion within our community, and they have the system framework set up already to be able to help people either via phone, email, to be able to talk with them about their needs and not necessarily make them have to do a complicated online application.
Okay, and maybe just for myself, I might be willing to just trust our community partners that they're going to do that well, but I'd hope there'd be some data or reporting that we can get back at the end of the program that here's how many people this program helped, and here's the different demographic and ethnic groups that they were part of, and geographic as well, and making sure that matches our citywide data and who actually needs the help. So I guess I would be willing to trust them, but I would like some reporting back.
Certainly.
Councilmember Valdemoros?
Yeah, and along those lines, I feel like we have to be more intentional as well, because it is an emergency and we know what the zip codes have suffered the most from COVID, and some of the population and the demographics, that those might be the ones that actually need our help the most, because a lot of families have not been able to go back to work because they were infected or whatever it is. And so maybe we need to make it more robust, like very intentional, already have somewhat of an idea who we want to help because of their circumstances, than letting somebody else to tell us, and then all of a sudden we run into issues like, oh man, we didn't really, think all of it through. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Okay.
Council Chair.
Sorry, who is that?
Oh, this is Bobby. Director Gus Jensen has her hand raised.
Yes. And do you want me to ask or no? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. We'll see if this works. Well, never mind.
Okay, so I think I know the question, which is how do we make sure that among these different organizations that the same criteria, that they're looking at the same criteria and they're not inserting their own sort of criteria in addition to what the city would ask?
So thank you for that question, Council Chair and Cindy Gus Jensen. We would definitely expect that when our partners are coming into a contract or an agreement with us, that we as the city will provide the framework and the metrics that we require. And that would be something we would move quickly into. We use Zoom grants or other mechanisms to put in all the information and the metrics, and then we expect that reporting to come back. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, but are these guideposts or are they solid like criteria? Will they be in the contracts?
Yes, they will be in the contracts, and it will be based on what I'm presenting here, unless we have different guidance from you as council.
Okay, great, thank you.
So if we're okay moving to the last group of proposed rapid rehousing, Bobby, could you pull us to that slide? So we have 3 partners that currently work on rapid rehousing for folks coming out of homelessness: the Road Home, Utah Community Action, and South Valley Services. This could potentially serve up to 6 months of assistance, and with a little bit lower AMI threshold than our rent and mortgage assistance. We could offer this as a variety of ways to help with deposit, rent, combined with case management services that each of these partners currently does in this realm already. We would like to also really focus on making sure that priority is given to those that are high-risk individuals in non-congregate shelter to receive this information, or excuse me, to receive the assistance. We have been working with our technical advisor or assistant through Housing and Urban Development to work very carefully with our partners, identifying how the funds from FEMA and other HUD would potentially bolster or be separate from these programs. As you're familiar with, I think in recent reports from the mayor's office, from Mr. Litvak, the high-risk individuals that have been helped in the Stay Safe, Stay Home motel programs need a place to be able to get into housing from that situation. Keeping 100 plus folks in motels is not a super sustainable situation. So that's really all I have. The last, if you could skip through the data sources, Bobby, to the last slide, which is a timeline. We've talked about this before, but we want to make sure that everyone is aware of the, what we're calling cliffs, or things that are beginning to impact our community members right now. We anticipate still receiving our HUD CV dollars from HUD in the coming weeks. We know the dollar amounts, but we don't have the guidance in detail to be able to bring that back to the council yet. And we all know that at the end of July, the federal assistance, the Paycheck Protection Plan, will be expiring. And so this is one way that we can hopefully bolster our community. I think that's all I had to share today. If there are other questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes, thanks for the presentation. On the last rapid rehousing proposed criteria. How much money is the city provided for this one? Because we had the 1.1 million, seemed like it was broken up into the rental and mortgage.
So 750 for rental, 250 for mortgage assistance, and then just 100,000 would be able to assist with the rapid rehousing. And
Okay.
dollars are going to be leveraging with existing work that our partners are doing, but just helping a little more flexibility on those dollars.
So we're kind of just giving it a boost. Money that's already there. We're just boosting it by another $100,000.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions, council members? Okay, great. Thank you, Lonnie. We appreciate the presentation. Let's go ahead and item 4 on our agenda is a tentative 15-minute break. So we'll go ahead and take that if everybody, but we won't take, we're going to do 12 minutes instead because I want to keep us going on schedule. So please be back promptly at 4:30 for the police department follow-up briefing. Okay, we had Darren a minute ago. Where'd you go, Darren? Yay.
Snacking, so I was hiding, but I'm here.
Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. I do want to give as much time as we can to this discussion. We're scheduled for an hour. Let's see. We're going to go to the item number 5 on our agenda, which is the fiscal year 2020-2021 budget for the police department. This is a follow-up discussion that I and now I think all of us on the council have requested. At the table with us, we have Jennifer Bruno from the City Council Deputy Director. We also have Chief Brown. So I wanted to start by asking the administration to share and follow up on a number of issues. And then I thought that following that presentation, we could open it up to questions and comments from the council. So to start, we'd like an update on recently funded city equity projects and how this could inform the issues being discussed. So focusing on how that applies specifically to this situation, and you don't need to talk about the full equity project right now. An update on comp stats, just quick data gathered by the police about crime and police interactions, information that's publicly available on the internet, and additional information the department can provide from the chief. Clarification on whether Salt Lake City follows any of the practices that are criticized in other communities and whether written policies are in place on items like tear gas, chokeholds, rubber bullets, other similar equipment methods. Clarification on the crisis intervention team model and whether Salt Lake City uses it and how we use it. Information on community-oriented policing, what's the staffing level, how do we make it successful? Clarification on the budget amount for body cameras and resources that would be needed. And reduction in sworn officers who have a body camera and how we could, what that need is. So I'll turn the time over to Jennifer Bruno to start us off, and then we'll turn it over to the chief, and looks like we have the deputy chief as well. So go ahead, Jennifer.
Mr. Chair, I don't know that the council staff has a framing of this necessarily. This is a intention to allow time for the council to talk more about this budget. So I'll just turn the time back over to you and the administration.
Okay, great. So we've got, like, as I said, we've got Chief Mike Brown, Deputy Chief Tim Doubt, and Chief of Staff Rachel Otto.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I think just based on the order of the items listed, I can start with the bigger picture view around the equity plan. So thanks again for giving us an opportunity to talk about this. And I know that you all know that it's been a priority of this administration really since the transition phase to figure out how to intentionally build more equitable communities. And that's why we approached you several weeks ago regarding funding for a citywide equity plan. And that's been in the works. And again, we're grateful for the council for funding that plan while we were looking at a number of other places to make those cuts. So the equity plan, of course, is more of the longer range, bigger picture project around equity, and we've been thinking about it internally as kind of our point of orientation to ensure that every time that we're communicating as a city, making policy, making program, making financial decisions, that those kinds of determinations are made with an understanding of how the city investments in the
Oh, Rachel, we lost you.
this opportunity, and then provide some guideposts. The equity plan will be providing us with some guideposts and the processes to ensure that we are, allocating resources and going through different processes through the city really intentionally so that we can increase inclusiveness and belonging overall in the city. So that's the longer range plan, and we're about to launch the RFP process there, and looking forward. We make sure that the community has a chance to weigh in on the kinds of outcomes and deliverables we're hoping to get from the plan. I know we've talked about that before, and we are looking forward to coordinating with you and the rest of the council on that process. So, of course, with recent events, I think it's become even more clear to all of us that there are steps that we need to take right now. So that's part of the obviously it's been the fodder of a lot of internal discussion on the administrative side, and I know it has on the council side too. And I think that we have a lot of opportunity to work together. I think we're thinking a lot along a lot of the same lines. So we have been working toward the launch of a commission on racial equity and policing, which we have the desire, of course, to work with you on, so that it may be a citywide commission on racial equity and policing, not necessarily just housed on the administrative side there. But the way that we've been envisioning the commission is to task it with organizing community listening sessions to begin with, and then working towards a community charter or kind of a community contract or compact of sorts with the advocates who do want to collaborate and coordinate with us. Then the next step there would be being able to examine police department policies, particularly around use of force and engagement with the broader community. And, the goal is really just to be very transparent around and intentional around looking at policies, looking at best practices, and being able to talk to the public about, what the changes they want to see might be, and how we can effectuate some of those changes. So there are other plans just on the administrative side that I know that the council's doing work too, and I'm hoping that in the coming days we'll be able to get together and work together on a lot of these initiatives. But we've been kind of organizing next steps into short, medium, and long term, and looking at immediate policy reforms, potential medium and longer term policy reforms, budget allocations, and then just administrative and legislative actions that we might take to make sure that we're addressing the things that we need to address and kind of get to those next steps with the community in the coming days. So I know that that's kind of high level in terms of the equity work, but that the immediate equity work that we're focusing on in the police department will be one piece of the citywide equity plan. So the equity plan is obviously a much bigger project, and we'll look at food, digital processes, all of those issues, and the police equity and racial equity and policing and how we approach that is something that we're ready to take some immediate actions on and hope to have your collaboration with. I'm not sure if the mayor, I see the mayor is here, and she may want to add something to my higher level explanation.
Is that okay, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm sorry I had to jump off for another meeting for a few minutes there. I would just add that general structure that she outlined, where we're looking at short, medium, long term, and the different types of actions, be it administrative or budget or policy, is also a structure for us to orient our community conversations that we're having and be able to hopefully efficiently receive ideas and feedback and be able to triage things, so to speak, and be able to move as quickly as we can. I just wanted to also thank the council for your unanimous support of the citywide equity plan funding back in March. And, you know, that was a time when we were looking at, you know, really serious budget cuts. But we had that one-time revenue come through and we didn't ask for much. It would have been easy for the council to say, not now, let's hold off, but that's not who you are and that's not what you did. And that commitment that you and I share to pulling back the rug of how the city operates and how we may perpetuate inequities without meaning to do so, but we're ready to fix it now, is something that you know, brings a lot of strength, I think, to our city as a whole. Now that we have an even greater mandate from our residents to do that work and do it well and do it quickly. So thank you for your support for all of the time and for the work that's ahead of us.
Okay, thank you. Chief, do you want to talk us through the comp stat information?
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Chair Wharton, and thank you to all the council members for allowing us the chance to talk about some very important issues that we need to address here in our city, but even more importantly across the country. And I just want to say, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say, 15 days ago, with the tragic death of Mr. George Floyd, we offer our condolences as a police department and as a city, and we're so sorry for his family and their loss. Last Tuesday, I brought some officers in here to talk about, we brought some officers in to address a group of African-American community leaders to talk about what we've done and what we do. And it was kind of a grassroots efforts. We brought the officers in kind of unscripted, and to a T, these officers were very upset because the actions of those 4 officers in Minneapolis have really cast all of us in a very bad light. And our officers basically said that would not happen here. We have a duty to intercede and to take care of each other. And they were almost enraged by what had happened and said those individuals didn't even deserve to wear a badge or be called officers. But right now, I'm here to talk with you, and I hope that as we move forward, the things that we decide to do as a city that they're based in best practices, evidence-based, they're informed, they're comprehensive, and they're thoughtful. And if anybody knows me as the chief and as a person, I'm always willing to listen, always willing to learn, and that's how we're all going to move forward to effectuate the change that we need, the reform that is being called for in this country, and we support. With that, I'd like to talk a little bit about CompStat. CompStat is, we have a unit within the police department that is a CompStat unit, and it's led by a director who has 4 or 5 civilian analysts that work for her, and they do great work. Most of their work has been dedicated to crime stats and intelligence-led policing. Every week we put out a report that shows the hotspots and different things, the crimes that are trending, spikes, the locations, and where we should direct our officers and their efforts to help control crime in the city. But a lot of things, there are a few other things that they do that people don't realize. They also put together and track use of force. And all these things are on our website. But the use of force is put on the website, and it really spells out the reason or the nature of the use of force. It's tracked by the sex, the race, and the ethnicity. And it goes anywhere from handcuffing up to and including deadly force. But that information, we revamped our RMS system to be able to pull out very accurate information in 2018. And we've put that up so that we as a police department can be open and transparent in our actions. And again, it came from listening to the community and the needs and the wants that they want to know what's happening in their community, and the use of force that's being affected by this police department. Another report they put up is it's arrest data, and basically it's broken down by council district, and it talks about arrests through misdemeanors, citations, different arrests, but they're broken down by council districts. Again, that's in an effort to be open and transparent. And so if that information needs to be built upon, if we need to build that out and look at things a little more granular, I'm here to listen and to take any suggestions and to move that forward, because this police department is always stood on the principle that we need to be open and transparent with the communities that we serve. So, Mr. Chair, is there any questions on that?
I do, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, just one second. I wanted to get clarification on what we'd asked previously. Where are the policies written down that talk about whether our department uses tear gas, chokeholds, rubber bullets, things like that?
Okay, within our policy, we have a large policy and procedure manual, and within there, we address these policies, policies that talk about restraints. But I will tell you, it does not say that we will not use chokeholds and we will not use kneeling on airways or neck manipulation. I've been doing this job for 30 years here in Salt Lake City, and through our training and practice and culture, I've never been taught that. I'm not saying it doesn't need to be written down. I'm just saying that we don't teach that, we don't train it, and on the streets, we don't use it. The only time it would ever be used is if it was a fight for your life type situation that would require, or it would be allowed that an officer use deadly force. But as far as a restraining issue or to hold somebody like you saw in Minneapolis, we do not do that. I don't, in talking with Mayor Mendenhall and her staff, we have started today to revisit, or actually to rewrite that policy. I will have policies to you, the council, to review, all of us to review tomorrow, and we can have that policy put up, basically planting the flag and saying we will not use chokeholds and we will not use tear gas. If you'd like, I can talk a little bit about tear gas. Tear gas, tear gas is, we don't use in our public order unit, the ones that go out to deal with riotous situations, the things that we saw last Saturday, very disturbing things we saw. They do not deploy tear gas. They don't train on it, they don't use it, and they don't have those munitions within their inventory. The only squad that has tear gas would be the SWAT team, and that would be used if somebody's barricaded in a home or a residence or apartment, but it would be used very in isolation and directed at one individual. It is not within the Salt Lake City Police Department's policy through the public order to use tear gas, because that would be an indiscriminate use of force. The force that we use, and I will say that we don't use rubber bullets. Rubber bullets, again, they're rubber bullets. They have a hard core and they're coated in rubber, and their intention is to be fired into a crowd and to bounce uncontrollably. They cause contusions, they cause abrasions, hematomas, they can fracture bones, and they can actually damage organs that can lead to death. They're indiscriminate, and we do not use those. We use very selective fired foam rounds that would be used at individuals as a use of force very selectively. Those that are continuing violent actions or destroying property and things like that. So again, it doesn't say in our policy. In fact, I talked to the commanders this morning. It doesn't say It does say that we have tear gas as an option, but that will be changed, and we will basically say that it will not be used. But by practice again, and by policy and what we do on the street, we do not use tear gas.
Okay, on the bullets, though, I think there would be some videos and some demonstrators from Saturday that would disagree. It appears that rubber bullets were used. Is that true, or can you speak to that?
Well, Mr. Chair, I can only speak to what Salt Lake City's policies are and what we do and what we use. Now, we brought agencies from all over the state here to help. And again, they may have different tactics and techniques, and they may deploy, and through an after action report, we'll find out those things. But this lends itself to that bigger conversation that we need to have on a national platform. There's over 18,000 different law enforcement agencies in this country, all of which have different policies regarding use of force, chokeholds, neck manipulations. I mean, some agencies still allow and certify neck manipulations and chokeholds. And so we as a law enforcement nationally are stepping up to say there needs to be some very core policies and procedures that value the sanctity of life, and that we use the very best practices in what we do and how we police our nation.
Okay. So you're saying that if rubber bullets were fired, that would not have been at the most recent protests, and then at the riots after, you're saying if rubber bullets were fired, those were not fired by Salt Lake City officers?
No, we don't even own those. We don't own those. Like I was talking, we use a foam round and a very selective plastic round for the work that we do.
Okay, and is that written down somewhere?
Yes, that's in policy. Those are all in policy.
I know we require de-escalation training. Are officers required to warn before shooting?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
I said, I know we require de-escalation training. Do we require that officers warn before shooting?
They try to give every verbal command possible. I mean, to drop the gun, drop the knife, stop, resisting, whatever may it be. And then if possible and practical, to use, I mean, you would never go from a situation of a low intensity to a deadly use of force unless that's what you may be confronted with. So there are different tools that we have that we use. The very first is verbal commands, like you're talking about, but then we can move into, there's actually physical controls, there's OC, there's tasers, there's our batons. But a lot of times it's a moving continuum of force, and it's dictated by what the subject is doing at the time. And so if it's possible, I would expect all those things to be used or possibly used, but sometimes we're not afforded that luxury.
Okay, meaning like because the situation escalates too quickly?
Yes, many times some of these things escalate within seconds, and it's not possible to go through the entire range of use of force options.
Okay. I know also our office, we have a policy that requires our officers to intervene if they see an officer engaging in conduct that's prohibited by Salt Lake City. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. What about shooting at moving vehicles?
We do not shoot at moving vehicles.
Okay. Is that written down somewhere?
Yes, that's in policy.
Okay.
Unless, Mr. Chair, unless it's an active shooter situation. I mean, if it's a deadly force where somebody's firing upon citizens or firing on us, at that time, that's a deadly force situation, and that probably would be authorized. But just as a standard practice, if you fired at a moving vehicle that's not a threat to anyone, you've now created a situation where you have a vehicle, a large 3,000-pound weapon going down the street. And so there's a lot of thought and training that goes into that.
Okay, and then can you talked about this for our with a small group of council members on Friday, but can you talk about what our procedure is for when there is an officer involved critical incident? How is that? We've used the term independent investigation. Can you explain to the other council members who weren't in that discussion and to anybody that might be listening at home what that means?
Yes, I just saw Chief Doubt, you just joined us. And before we move on to that question, and I'll get there, but Chief Doubt, we've been working over the last 4 or 5 months to implement beanbag rounds within our police department, another less lethal option for us. And right now, Chief Doubt, you want to talk about the numbers and where they're at? And I don't believe any of those rounds were fired at the protest. Is that correct?
That is correct. We did not have them issued yet. We have issued a few to our public order unit. We need to train the rest of the officers and sergeants on those before we issue those out.
Okay.
All right. I just want to make sure.
Will you talk about what the independent investigation is and how that works?
Yes. Mr. Chair, when we have an officer-involved critical incident, it used to be that Salt Lake City would investigate its own, call out our homicide squad, and they would basically take the witness statements, do the interviews, and conduct the whole investigation to find out if the use of force was justified by law. For the last 3 or 4 years, in working with the district attorney, we have moved to an officer-involved critical incident where we have teams. Salt Lake City has a team, West Valley has a team, Unified PD has a team, but we don't investigate our own officer-involved critical incidents. So when we have a shooting, one of those teams is called in and the scene is turned over to them. They conduct all the interviews, they collect all the film, the body-worn cameras, they do the interviews, and that investigation is then compiled the course of a few weeks and taken to the district attorney's office where they screen the information, and then the district attorney, Sim Gill, will take that information and render a decision whether it was justified by law under the use of force statute. The other, there are other reviews. The Citizen Review Board, the CRB, also takes that information, and then there are 7 different. There are about 10 or so members of the CRB, but they represent each council district. They will take that information and have the conversations, and they will go over it, look at it, and they'll make a recommendation to the police department on their finding of that use of force situation. And then internally, we have our internal affairs unit that will take, again, the things that we've gathered from these investigations, conduct our own interviews, and then we will make an internal review of policies. So there's the criminal statutes that are reviewed by the DA, there's internal policies that are reviewed by internal affairs, and then we have the CRB that makes a recommendation back to the chief's office on their findings as well.
Okay. And then, sorry, my last question is, who sets the policy? Is it by state law or by city or by practice? Who sets the policy of how far we want to go with either escalating or using force relative to the crime that's being investigated. So, like, for example, who decides that if there is going to be a property crime, whether we chase the person down or something like that? Is that a policy decision, or is that like the officers they're trained to follow the suspect? Like, does my question make sense?
Yeah, I mean, we train our officers under the state codes that are applicable for the use of force. We train our officers to investigate crimes, to follow up. A lot of times we respond to situations in progress, and so our policies dictate how they handle the situation. But a lot of it is from tactics, and if they're confronted with the use of force situations, we've trained them extensively through our academies and through an FTO process to use that training and to use their judgment and to take the necessary steps to keep to apprehend this individual if possible, and to try to maintain the sanctity of life. We try to do it at the lowest level we can. In the recent years, we've really embarked on a lot of training that is focused around de-escalation and talking and using exceptional tactics. If we can get ourselves to a position of cover, then we have time. If you can increase the time, you have more time to communicate and to de-escalate. So our officers are always looking for those situations that will afford them the opportunity to de-escalate it. And in this organization for the last 3 or so years, we have worked very hard to do those things. In fact, I firmly believe the way you practice the game on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is how you're going to play the game on Saturday. And so we work hard, and it's just not our initial academy. We come back for another 40 hours of in-service training every year, and de-escalation is part of those trimester trainings that we do. Again, it can't be. It's much like implicit bias training or de-escalation. It's not one and done. You can't just check the box, have the certificate, and say I'm ready to go. It's something that you need to continually work on all the time. And so we actually have a medal that we hand out to officers that have used these exceptional tactics where they could have used deadly force and didn't. And so we try to talk about how important that is and to remind our officers about the sanctity of life and not just theirs, but everybody's sanctity of life.
Okay, Chief Dowd, or sorry, Deputy Chief Dowd, did you want to add to that?
I just, I'm thinking that you maybe need to clarify a little bit of an answer to your question was the type of crime that someone commits. And the standard that our officers are held to is the standard that the Supreme Court set in Graham versus Connor, which does take that into account. What type of crime was the officer trying to enforce or pursue or whatever before they use any type of force? And they're held to that standard. And that's what informs our use of force continuum and how we train our officers as well. But that's the standard they're held to in judge fly.
Okay, thank you. I think I saw a hand from Councilmember Valdemoros.
Hi, Chief and Deputy Chief. Thank you so much for that information. I have a lot of questions from looking at the staff report and all the things that we do. Let's start with your that procedures manual that you were talking about. Maybe it's a policy. Where is it? Who writes it? And who's involved with it? Like, does the council have any, do we see it ever? Do we have any input on this procedure manual that you're talking about?
We have thank you, Council Member Valdemoros. It's a good question. We have an extensive policy and procedure manual, and it's on our webpage. You can find it. All those policies are there. We recently embarked on a CALIA accreditation, which is a commission accreditation for law enforcement. And we actually achieved that. And that's a huge milestone for our agency. But in doing that, every policy within that manual is reviewed and looked at, and now have an audit squad that looks at different issues, brings back information. But as far as council input, I don't believe we've ever had council input, but I'm not concerned to share those with you and to have the conversations like we're having now, because sometimes we have blind spots, sometimes we see things different, but it doesn't hurt to have those communications with the community as well as the council or anybody that wants to talk with us.
Okay. So with that said, right now we don't have a process for the council to comment on it. But you said you will be reviewing that book or that procedures manual, that you will send it tomorrow to us so that we can look at it. And then you were interested, and correct me if I'm wrong, interested in taking the tear gas out as an option, also the rubber bullets out as an option. So how, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if that's the case, how fast can we implement this? Like, how fast can you rewrite this and say, okay, starting July 1st, it's out? Is that possible?
Well, yes. What I did is I talked to Chief Doubt this morning, and knowing that our policy didn't prohibit chokeholds and didn't prohibit the use of tear gas for public order situations, I talked to Chief Doubt and I said, Chief, get going on this. And Tim, I believe that you have worked on that today, and we should have a policy in the morning that we would like to share with you on those things to look at. Is that correct, Chief?
I reviewed the draft less than an hour ago. I instructed them to enact it in the morning. So it's ready to go.
So it took us a matter of hours to do that. But again, council, if you'd like to see that, and Mayor Mendenhall, I don't know if you've seen that or your staff, but we can all look at that because right now, these are big deals. And I think Salt Lake City should lead from the front and show that our willingness to be open and transparent and make these, it's not a hard decision. We don't do these things, but we should state it in black and white. These are prohibited.
Yeah, and then how is there a process for it that you have to get some sort of agreement with the rest of the police officers, or is something that you can do immediately?
No, it's administrative. We can do it immediately.
All right, great. That's awesome. My next question to you is the de-escalation training that you guys have. There's an attachment to, it's called Department Performance Measures of the staff report. And the first thing that you say in there, it says training, provide a minimum of 2 elective courses annually, one of which will address de-escalation. And then you have some numbers from 2016, 2017, 18, 19, 20. It says 5, 3, 2, 3. I'm not sure what that means. Is it 5 training courses per officer? Is it just 5 officers? I'm not in that one.
Council member, I might be at a loss of what you're looking at, but I would certainly, if you can provide that to me, get you a follow-up very, very quickly on that.
Sure. Maybe the better question is, there's some training that you guys do, performance measures. It does say that I'm assuming that the officers have 2 elective courses annually. One of them has to be de-escalation, and then another one, I'm not sure what that might be. Is this a yearly thing that they get trained on de-escalation? So obviously it says annually. So do they get trained just once a year on de-escalation and some other course? And do you think that's sufficient?
Chief Doubt, did you have something on that?
Let me just say, we have what we call trimesterly training. So 10 hours every trimester of the year, we provide the training that they have to go. Each one of those, we really, really try. And in fact, I can't think of the time we haven't had de-escalation training in any of those. And then they have to have 40 hours to keep their peace officer certification. So that's where the elective courses come in. They can take an elective course, but one of them has to be de-escalation course. Does that answer your question?
So maybe that's what it means. Like, so in 2016 you had 5, I guess, 5 times a year.
I think Councilmember Valdemoros, I think that at one time we went back and looked at our training for the year, and throughout that training that we offered, there may have been 5 components of de-escalation. So many of our trainings may not focus strictly on de-escalation, but there's a component to it, and so that might be what they're looking at. But I would love to see what you're seeing right now, and I could get you back real quick. But
would it be helpful, sorry to interrupt, but just would it be helpful if Bobby maybe shared the staff report so that you can on the screen so that everyone knows what Anna's looking at? Because I think that question would be, it'd be nice to hear that answer, but it's hard if you don't know what we're looking at.
Sorry about that. It's page 11 of the staff report, Bobby, and maybe it's...
Yes, one moment, I will get that right up.
That one, the very first one that says training.
That would be the number of courses that were provided.
To each of our 600 something officers?
Well, it could have been that the 2 in 2018, I'll have to go back and look, the 2 in 2018 was Arbinger and Blue Courage. So we have many sessions that go through those. So that's the number of different courses that are provided. It may have been 50 sessions of a course, but we have one course, if that makes sense.
Okay, and then, but are all officers, right now you have almost 700, maybe a little bit less because some of them are administrative, but do all of them have to go through this training every year? Like let's say 500 officers?
Yes.
Go ahead,
Chief. Tim. They are required training, at least the 40 hours. There are required trainings that they need to attend. I'd have to look at exactly what those courses are, but I think Chief Dout's right. Those were Blue Courage and Arbinger training that we implemented in 2016. But we've been working on those courses for the last 2 or 3 years to get everybody through all of those, because that's a huge embarkment.
I think that's one of the things that at least I'm looking at when we talked about systematic issues that we might have. I think we ought to have better information, and in any case, de-escalation courses must be taken by all officers once or twice a year, if not twice a year at the very least. We saw, from one of the incidents that some officers, suggested to de-escalate the situation, one of the videos that we saw, but then it ended up, it's something different. But obviously somebody has gotten the de-escalation class down, but there were others that not necessarily, didn't look like they did. And so that's why I'm asking, because if we can have all the officers, and truly understand what de-escalation means, and and have that as the very first thing that they do, and try as long as I can, then maybe the outcome of certain instances will be different. Then the last thing for now, so the independent investigation that you're talking about, that all the So Unified Police or West Valley City will do those, or as in case of another jurisdiction. Do you guys have a timeline, like a time frame where this investigation needs to happen so that people know what to expect when it goes to the DA? So our cameras, for example, we know in 10 days, we have to, you have to release the videos to the public. These investigations, is it 30 days? Is it 45 days? They said, whenever. What is the policy right now?
There's not a policy as far as how long the investigation takes. Many times, the initial investigation done by the OICI team, whether it's Unified or West Valley or Salt Lake City, many times that'll be completed within 4 to 6 weeks. Some are a little more complicated than others that involve many more witnesses and different things that they need to pull together. But I would say most of them are screened within probably 2 months with the district attorney's office. And from there, he pours, Sim Gill pours through those things and renders his decision. As far as the timeline on his end, I don't have an answer for that because that's never been part of our process.
No, I understand that. And then we can talk to the DA about their process, but I'm interested in our process. If we have, even if Unified Police didn't have it or West Valley, but us as Salt Lake City, when we investigate a crime for another jurisdiction, sorry, not a crime, but the investigation, if we could have a swifter timeline or a swifter time frame of when our investigation is to happen, I would like to advocate for that. I think it's important to be the example on on certain things. We don't want things to take too long where we forget about stuff. And then, do you guys have a code of conduct? That's my last question for now. A code of conduct within your department?
Absolutely, it's part of our policy, and it's some of the very first policies that are listed in there. And
okay.
Our expectations, our mission, our vision, our core values. So yes, absolutely, what we expect of our officers. If you would like, Councilmember Valdemoros, going back to your other question, I can get with our OICI team and just look at some of the ones we've been called out on to give you a date, kind of a time range as far as from the time we got called out to the time we screened. That may give you an idea or a perspective of what it's, the time frame it takes us to do them.
All right, thank you.
And Councilmember, I just one more thing. You or any council member are more than welcome to attend any of the trainings that we do, to our de-escalation trainings or some of the courses we put on. You would be more than welcome to sit and hear what we're talking about, what we're training our officers to.
Councilmember Johnston, you had your hand up.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the questions. The details matter a lot right now. So Chief and Deputy Chief, I appreciate your answers, and particularly the quick turnaround for those policy changes and codifying those. I echo my fellow council members' questions to make sure we have some details in place now. My question is more the bigger picture structural changes that I'm looking towards, and the mayor and Rachel Otto referred to earlier about one of them, which is a commission essentially on equity and policing. I love the fact that I have a whiteboard behind me. I'm going to pull this up and show you my thoughts because it's easier than telling you. Now, Mayor, what I want you to do is correct me if this is not aligning with what you're thinking as well or anybody else. What I'm thinking right now, throw it out there, is My Brother's Keeper Alliance had the pledge. I believe we looked at doing this. Review, engage, report, reform. If that looks familiar to anybody?
Will you turn your screen a little for, yeah, thanks.
Sorry, there we go. If you can see it now. Essentially, it was review police policies and practices, engage the community, a wide community in getting information and feedback, report and get feedback again, and then look at reforms. My assumption right now is a potential commission on racial equity and policing would handle this piece. as well as perhaps make recommendations on reforms. And you could look at details there. I'm also looking at Campaign Zero, which has 10 areas essentially. And we are probably doing some of these already, and some of these we're looking to codify, and some of these we have to look at new. But this would be, for me, something that the commission would be looking at as a piece of what they're evaluating, or tool. And so for me, the Civilian Review Board for us is a big part. And that falls in number 2 in the Campaign Zero concept. But I think there are things we could look at here. The question for me is, in our current budget, and I've gotten a lot of feedback, as I think you all have, a lot of emails about quote unquote defunding the police department this year, as well as I've gotten a lot of emails about don't defund the police department. I want to make sure that we are looking at, well, the reality is right now, we just don't have much money. It's going to be a flat budget in my view. And so any money we do have, I want to make sure if we hold on to it to get some information back, that we're looking at body cameras and training, which you've talked about, but also about non-criminal work, social workers, homeless outreach work, mental illness issues, substance abuse issues, those kind of things, and how we're handling those. And one of the things that we're not funding are some of these workers in this budget we may want to look at as a council. That's how I'm viewing it, Mayor. Is this sort of aligning at all with what you're thinking, or some, I know it's kind of early and maybe it's not fleshed out at all?
Yes.
I have a question though, Andrew.
Yeah.
About the commission, like, and I guess this is to the mayor as well. I mean, we've been asking for years about what, how the Human Rights Commission can play a bigger role. Like, is that an existing commission that we could charge with taking some of this on? Or, and then I know a lot of comments also in our meetings and in emails have been about wanting to strengthen our Police Civilian Review Board. Like, do we need to reinvent and create another commission that's dedicated to this? Or are these things that we can use and maybe save a little bit of money and staff time on giving these 2 existing committees and really like giving them the charge of digging deep on these topics?
Chris, your audio was breaking
Oh, sorry.
at the beginning of your question. The latter part I came through, but
Okay, so I'll just restate it really quickly. Should can we charge the existing Human Rights Commission and the Police Civilian Review Board with doing these important tasks and maybe save a little bit of staff time and money, not having to reinvent the wheel, because they're already in place, they already have, you know, they're already staffed, or excuse me, not staffed, but they're already, we already have people serving, is what I'm saying. So that would be one less delay. We could just say that we want them to start working on these issues right now.
was that a question for me?
Or Andrew.
Well, I think I'm not the administrator of the city, so I won't speak for the mayor in any way. I think I'm trying to make sure that my expectations and my thoughts are aligning perhaps with you all and the mayor. In my view, I'm not saying that the Campaign Zero pieces are all things that we have to implement, because there's so many details in there that are going to matter. And there's a wide variety of things that would have to be part of that discussion, right? What I'm thinking though is this is perhaps for the city and the police department, if it's systemic, we need to really get a full-blown look at the whole scope, frankly. This piece down here is where it sort of draws me in, and saying, do police have to be our frontline responders for unsheltered homelessness all the time? Or clear mental illness issues or substance use issues? Are there other ways that we could allow police to do what we are training them for, frankly? I'm not saying they don't de-escalate well and do CIT and those kind of things, but could we have other interventions that would allow community policing to be more effective for everybody? And that's sort of a big scope change in my view. And that's where I'm thinking we may need something standalone. I don't think the Human Rights Commission is a bad idea in any way, Chris. It should be a big part of this. frankly, for the whole city. In the equity discussion, I think the Human Rights Commission is where a lot of the good feedback and recommendations should come from for the system of the city. For the police department, we may need something a little more targeted in my view, but that's just my opinion.
Okay, I want to remind people that unlike other boards that are largely administrative, that Human Rights Commission, that both the mayor and the council can direct them, because they advise both sides, both branches. So that is an option, council members. We could, as a council, say we want them to look at these issues and come back to us. And Councilmember Fowler.
Andrew, were you done? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna. Andrew, were you finished? Sorry.
Oh yeah, so I'm completely
Okay,
done for the day. I'm gonna go away.
No, don't. We need you. Councilmember Fowler.
Yeah, I do have a few questions. So, Chief, and a couple of things that have been brought up, or something that has been brought up a couple of times, is the Community Review Board, and whether or not it has, well, for me, whether or not it has any real power, or if in fact it's sort of just lip service to something. So I'm curious, you mentioned that the Community Review Board, or this, excuse me, the Citizen Review Board can review, and I believe, the investigation or the investigative report, and then provide recommendations. Can you walk me through your what you think the Citizen Review Board does, and what sort of recommendations they have the ability to give you? I need a little bit more information on that, please.
Sure. The Citizen Review Board, the chair, Rick Rasmussen, I think by statute, they review all use of force. And Rick is privy to sit in any and all of the internal affairs interviews, to be able to ask questions, to provide, to seek out the information that he would need to take back to the citizen committee that's going to review these things. Once that's done, they take the interviews and everything independent of our IA and take that back and review them with their committee, that then will render a decision. The decision comes to me in these cases, and I take that into consideration before I render any decision based off of the internal affairs case. Many times I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, keep going. I'll wait to interrupt you.
Many times we're in an alliance. Sometimes they recommend we hold officers accountable, and they recommend that it wasn't a violation of policy. I'll tell you some really good things that have come out of the Citizen Review Board from a big perspective. When we had shooting up in the avenues of Mr. Barker, James Barker, at that time, we were allowing officers to go on calls with only one officer. You could call and say, I'll advise if I need it back. Well, one of the big recommendations was that is not a good practice. If you have people free and available, 2 officers is better than 1, because it actually de-escalates the situation. And many times you don't have to use force just because you have 2 officers there. Another big thing was when we had the situation here recently, it was called 909. And it's really just a code word that we implemented in our training and within our department, that not everybody has. I mean, police officers are human too, and sometimes we're having a bad day and we go to work and somebody is able to push our buttons and we're just not doing the job that we should be doing. And rather than your back officer just let you go down a bad path, that you can reach in and grab them on the shoulder and says 909, that's the code word. I'm in, and you just step back and let me take it. That we don't end up doing those things. So they provide recommendations to us kind of on the big picture and things they see. So in that aspect, they're very valuable to the police department.
I appreciate that. I do have a couple of questions. How is the chairperson picked, and where does the chairperson work for the police force, or?
Oh, no, I think they work for HR. I think they're under the Director Jody Langford in HR.
Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think the chairperson is a member of the Board of Citizens, but the administrators who work for the city, right? Yeah.
Correct. And the staff position is located in the HR department and essentially managed by the HR director.
So with this process, does the administrative person then, not the chair, but the administrative person, Rick, does he go to the citizen review board before going to the internal affairs and asking questions? Meaning, does he go and brief the board and get their ideas of what questions they might have regarding the situation? I understand you can't have all the board members there for probably confidentiality reasons and things like that, but having that first step of gathering information of what the board would be curious in asking, rather than just having an administrator who's in an HR position asking questions.
Is that for me, council member?
It's for anyone who has the answer.
I do not know that, because those are independent of us. And so that probably would be something that we'd have to ask Mr. Rasmussen.
Okay. Thank you. We were talking obviously about the use of force. You mentioned use of force situations, and I was confused about whether that was use of force from if you're in a situation, if there was a policy of, I need to formulate that question. I'll come back to it. I have other ones. When we're looking at the staff report that was up a minute ago in that table, and I know that that's not in front of you, Chief, and I apologize, but there is a table of metrics regarding community-oriented policing. In the years, I want to say 2018, 2019, and 2020, it says 100% that you have a social worker and officers or the CIT officers that are deployable each shift. And it just says 100%. Would it be possible to provide further information regarding what that 100% means? Are they deployed on every call? Is that a number of calls? Does that 100% simply mean that they were there and available? And if that's what it means, can we get further information of really how many calls they went on and what the outcome of those calls were?
Yes, that's a good question. Can I get back to you with that in short time?
Of course. Yeah, I don't expect you to have that data right off the top of your head, but Chief Doubt?
I'm familiar with, I think, what you're asking. I think it says CIU officers, which is the person assigned to your council district to go to council community meetings. I don't remember anything about CIT.
Yeah, it's on page 12 and we're getting there, and I can point it out just so that we have the information.
Right.
I think it's 12. Yep, so right there, that first box, community policing, establish and maintain a co-responder team. And then we see 100% for those last 3 years.
Okay.
So I believe what that's saying is that in the last 3 years, you have 100% of the time had available a co-responder team model able to be deployed. Am I getting that right?
Yes, 4 shifts per week on average, yeah.
Okay, so I think I just would want some more data on how often they were actually deployed, and if possible, and clearly this is more of a long-term thing, I don't expect it tomorrow, but kind of what that outcome was. We keep talking about community policing and how we have this as a goal and a model and what we want to do. And right now it says 4 shifts per week. And how many shifts a week do you have?
Yeah, well, Councilmember Fowler, those those are great questions. And I had follow-up conversations today with our CIT sergeant who was getting information from Jessica Waters, who's our director of our social workers. But I really feel, and I've talked about this before, that our social workers are worth their weight in gold. They're great assets to the police department. And if we were going to expand anything that would make a huge difference within our police department, social workers would be a great place to put some efforts and some funding. Because look, so many of our calls are dealing with people that are suffering from mental health issues. So many of our calls are dealing with people that are suffering from addiction. So many calls, so many of our calls are dealing with people that are experiencing homelessness. And guess what? None of those are against the law. And we tend to dispatch officers, and many times we don't have the means to continue the casework. And that's the beautiful thing about our co-responder model, is that those social workers can continue the case management and can coordinate with our service providers and find people avenues to get out of addiction, mental health, and homelessness, which is, and find out what the root cause and help people move on, rather than just continually going back and dealing with them on a daily basis on a police call. So if you could give me some time, I'd like to give you some numbers and some, because we have numbers that not only show the effectiveness and being able to reduce the calls for service, but also I know one individual that they tracked. She was a female that over the course of a year, she had amassed almost $250,000 worth of, hospital stay time, mental health, ambulance, fire, police. And when we got her connected with a social worker, we were able to get her into a program, and basically she became self-sufficient, and we didn't have the effort that had to be to our community and taxpayers was huge. It was astronomical.
Sure. No, I'm with you on that one. Few other questions, and then I'll be done. You did mention the sort of duty to intervene of our officers as one of the policies, that if they see something that another officer shouldn't be doing, and you mentioned 909, is that policy of a duty to intervene, is that written in our policies? Okay. I wasn't sure on that, but so I just wanted to clarify that.
Hang on, I've got it right in front of me somewhere. I'll keep talking. I'll find it for you.
You're fine. Chief Count said yes, and so if
it's there, but it's actually a really compelling moving policy, if there ever is such a thing in police policy.
And then one of the other things, and this is not necessarily for you guys, maybe more for administration, more for council, me, or maybe kind of all of us. One of the things, and this comes back in part to the policy that Andrew was talking about, but we do have a city code that criminalizes certain acts. And all of you are very familiar that I am pretty familiar with a lot of the people that end up in our criminal justice system and the reasons why. And one of the things I would like to really do is look at our city code, because that's all we can control. But then I think we have a way to advocate in a larger level of getting rid of some of the stuff that maybe doesn't need to be there. Now, that doesn't mean that an officer, and I recognize this, can't write a ticket based on a state code that they are aware of. But as a city, I think we have the opportunity to go through that code, that criminal code, and say, what are some of the things that we can get rid of and maybe make a civil fine to? Or, I use the example that when we were not in COVID and I was working a lot over at the Matheson Courthouse, the amount of times that I ran across the street in the middle of the street is kind of a lot. I recognize I broke the law, right, on jaywalking. But what is that necessary to have a police interaction at that moment, right? And maybe in some ways it is, but I think that we need to dig deep, because we know statistically that some of these, and it's called the broken windows laws, right, disproportionately affect our communities of color. And so I'd really encourage us as a team to look at that city code and say, what can we decriminalize here? And I think that's one step that we can move towards this bigger idea of a more community-based policing effort, right? Where, so that's not really a question, it's more of a call to action, I think, from all of us. And maybe as we're looking at this commission or looking at how we're kind of doing something in the future, that might be one of the charges that we look at, right? Or as we have our equity team or things like that, that we're looking at those laws and decriminalizing a few things. So I wanted to throw that one out there. And then, and a lot of it, Chief, was because you brought up that it's not against the law to have a substance abuse disorder. Yet, our city code says you can't camp in a park, right? And we recognize you're not supposed to camp in a park, but do we need to have that a criminal act? Or could that be a civil fine, right? And so maybe there are things here that we can actually look at in a more in-depth way. The other question I had was more on the budget, since we're kind of here also supposed to talk about that. There was the beginning, sorry, I'm looking real quick. I'm looking at, again, our staff report, but there is sort of just the notable changes, I guess you would, that we had at the beginning of the budget when we very first presented the budget. One of the proposals for fiscal year 2021 is police officer equipment. It's $609,720. I was wondering what kind of police equipment that was budgeted for, because my understanding is that it's not body cams, right? So, which is another question, but do we know what that police equipment would be funded?
I'm only guessing because I can't see the report or the column, but I mean, to outfit an officer when we hire an officer, and the uniforms, the protective vest, the belt, the gun, the taser, it might be the computers in the car. It could be everything that an officer wears and uses as far as equipment, and updating equipment and different things like that. Chief Dowd, do you have anything more on that?
Yeah, you're exactly right on that. And if you really want detail on that, Shelley's online. She can give you a detail of what that actually all includes.
I think the generalization of what you just mentioned is fine. If we need more, I can get it offline if I need to dig into it. And then finally, the body cams. I think it's important that all of our officers have body cams. And so do we have suggestions on how to get that to happen? Does anyone have that hiding under their pillow?
Councilmember Fowler, look, cameras, Salt Lake City took a stance a long time ago that we would have cameras on our officers. We had them on everyone. That's the right side of history. And thank you for supporting us for the many years that we've had them. But they cameras wear out and they break. They used to be the ones that were wired to a battery pack, and now they're cordless. But a lot of our cameras are old and antiquated, and their service life is over. But I'm telling you, body-worn cameras are expensive, and it's not just the camera; it's the storage, and it's the different things that they're now. We're trying to tie the camera to if an officer turns on their siren, it turns on the cars in the immediate area so that we have many views of what we might be responding to. And if an officer draws their taser out, they're actually tied to the camera so that it turns the camera on. So if it's a real quick, fast-paced situation, you don't have to remember to reach up and touch that button 2 times to turn it on, because sometimes that is hard when seconds count. But they're more and more expensive. We have budgeted $512,000 for cameras, and
so
we need we need more than that. We were trying to make do with getting our first responders to have cameras, and those would be the people out on the road, out on the street doing it, and then having maybe a 10 or 15 cameras that detectives could take out. But if there was, I know money doesn't grow on trees right now, but if there was something that we could invest in, cameras would be it. It may take. I was talking to Captain Tierlink earlier, but I think we have between the $512,000, I think we have $118,000 that we got from a grant. Coupled together, that's about $628,000. That gets us a good start, but that doesn't get everybody a camera on the department. So detectives still would have to borrow a camera or use that phone app we talked about on the night we presented budget.
Well, we can probably address that too in our unresolved issues. I just want to jump in because we're 15 minutes over and I still have questions from 3 council members and I want to give them a chance. Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay. Councilmember Dugan.
Thanks for the time, Chief. I appreciate that. Deputy Chief Doubt, same thing. Thank you for answering all these questions. And I think most of my questions were already asked and brought forth from Councilmember Johnston and Fowler. So appreciate the effort there. I just want to kind of reiterate that we're looking at what's on the police officer's plate. And is what we have on his plate is what should be on his plate, or should we move that to someone else's plate who's more qualified to handle the issues? Chief, you talked about, the substance abuse issues, where a police officer doesn't have the years of experience in doing that, or a social worker. We need someone who's adept to that, skilled to that, and trained at that. So when we look at what's on the police officer's plate, we also need to make sure that our training is balanced to what he should be trained to do. And we got to make sure that our funding for that and our funding for the different responsibilities need to be all there. Because and does it need to be underneath the police department's budget, or does it need to be under a separate department's budget that handles the community affairs? And that needs to be a deep look, because we want to make sure we spend our training right, but we also do it at the right level and not just at everyone likes to go be the offensive guy, but we need to look at the defensive guy positions also when we do it. So I really don't have a question. I just want to make sure that we look at that holistic picture there, so we can eliminate the fear on both sides of the line.
Councilmember Dugan, thank you. I mean, you're talking about a huge system that really needs to come together to make sure that we serve those that are that are experiencing homelessness or addiction or mental health. And I think this touches on what Councilmember Fowler talked about, is that it's a whole system. It's the police department, it's health workers, it's service providers, it's the court system, it's the corrections. And so, I mean, it makes no sense to arrest somebody only to turn around and fine them $300 for their fine when they don't have a job, they don't have a home. That's just ludicrous. We got to start thinking outside the box. Is how can this system work together? And you're spot on. There are many things that I'd like to get out of the business of, but we are the tip that we're definitely a part of the system, but we're not the fix to this whole system. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Thanks, Chief. Council Member Mono.
Thanks. So I first wanted to respond to a few things that have just come up in the conversations. I think for me, the like de-escalation, implicit bias training, and the body-worn cameras, I hope that in future budget years, we don't look at those as like the extra things that we hopefully have money to fund, but that those things are essential, and that it's as essential as the gun that your officers are carrying. And so that's not something that we're trying to fight to get a few extra dollars for those things. To me, those things feel essential as the car and the gun. So I'm hoping that we stop looking at those as optional. I have been thinking along the lines of Councilmember Dugan as to what are we asking the police officers to do, and is it right that they're trying to be the person that responds to people with substance abuse or mental health issues? And I think the answer to me is no. And I think from a holistic perspective, if you look at, and it may take several years to get there, but if you look at us investing in more social services, I would imagine that the demands on the police department would be fewer, and that the police department would be freed up to focus on people that really are, you know, like continued repeated criminal offenders, and the people that we want the police department to be focusing on, rather than the encampment in front of the park, which is a nuisance, but not really a crime, right? To not have a house. I looked at the HUD grants that we talked about a few weeks ago, and I just picked out, of the ones that we did not fund, things that to me seem like there would be a pretty clear argument that they would eventually reduce the need on police officers, like early intervention and early education training, and a lot of homeless services. There are 25 different programs that we did not fund, different organizations working on those programs, and the price tag on those is $1.6 million to fund all 25 of those programs. And to me, those are organizations that, and I understand the funding structure is different, the money comes from different places, but those are organizations that are there to help our citizens to not need to interact with the police, which I think that's the goal. That's the longer term goal. So I guess I'll just sort of state where I'm at. I don't really feel like we can make huge drastic cuts right now. I don't feel like I'm informed enough as to what the police department is required to do. And I will say that I've talked to family members and friends that are retired or current police officers in different states, just because I want to get every side of the picture, and ask what they do, what are they faced with, what's the dangers of your job. And so I'm trying to understand that all. I don't feel like we can make drastic cuts now, but I hope we can start figuring out how to fund these organizations that are trying to do this work, that eventually will change the whole tide, so that we don't need, maybe we can reduce the police budget because we don't need you to do as many things. We can have you focus on specific things. So that's sort of where my thinking is evolving very quickly. So I won't say that that's where I'm at forever, but that's sort of where my mind is right now. But I do have one question for you, Chief Brown. And first of all, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to us and having this conversation. I really do appreciate it. In your heart, does the Salt Lake City Police Department have a problem with implicit bias and structural racism?
Councilmember Mono, I do not think so. I really don't. I think we have worked very hard through our training. One of the courses we took on was fair and impartial policing. And one of the first things they teach you is we all have biases. We really do. There are implicit biases in everybody. And the first thing to get past, and then to work on them. So no, I do not think we don't have systemic racism within this police department. I have never seen that in my 29-year career.
Thank you. If that's true, let's assume that's true, that the Salt Lake Police Department does not have a problem with systemic racism. The public perception is quite the opposite, or at least the perception for a lot of people is quite the opposite. So what can we do, either as leaders of the city or as the police department, to help bridge that gap? Because there are a lot of people that would swear that it's the exact opposite. And you hear stories of young Black men that feel like they were targeted for something just because of their skin tone. And my question is, if it's true that there is not a problem with systemic racism, then how do we get people to start trusting the police department? And I don't know the answer to that, and I assume that you don't either right now, but I hope it's something you can really think about.
I will. Councilmember Mono, you're talking about some huge things that are very near and dear to my heart as the chief. First off, we need to hire more diversity within our police department. That's a big step, because our police department looks like the communities that we serve. The other side, another thing is that look, we can teach implicit bias. We can talk about all these things in a classroom, but studies show that those are very short-term wins. The next step is taking that into our communities. And the council has been very supportive over the last 2 or 3 years to give us more officers. Before, we were running call to call to call. We didn't have time to stop and have an ice cream with somebody. We didn't have time to go play a pickup game. We didn't have time to interact with business owners. We're now staffed at a point where we have officers enough to fill the beats so that every beat has a police officer in it. And that, so there is some ownership as to that beat, but really that these officers become part of the community at which they serve. And if you're going call to call to call, you never have that opportunity. This IACP study that we just did, we've showed us that we didn't have enough. And so through an alignment, we've talked to the council about it. We put, I believe it was 40 something officers back to patrol so that we could make that happen. So we're not going to call. And it's my hope that we keep that and we keep pushing, because you build trust through relationships. And when you have relationships with the community, we come together and we find out that, and I've said many times, it's very hard. It's very easy to hate from afar. You can sit on your couch and watch TV and not like this or that or what's happening. But when officers in the community come together, all those biases and all those prejudices drop away, and we start seeing each other as people. And it doesn't matter what color, we're all people. And that's where we're going to make a change in how we police Salt Lake City. And we're right there. I'm telling you, council, thank you for your support of these officers and what we're doing. I can't speak enough as to how important it is to be able to have the staffing to interact with our community in a very positive way, because that's where true change is going to come in this country.
Thank you, Chief. Councilmember Rogers.
Yeah, being last is best of all the game because everyone's already asked all the questions, right? I'm grateful for the questions that have been proposed. So seriously, thank you. Andrew, I wanted to bring up Campaign Zero, but you touched on that. Chief, I'm going to send a bunch of questions to you still, but specifically, I wanted to hone in on Councilmember Mono talking about how can we get into the community and educate that way. And we have got to, I had a buddy call me up today who was from my 6th grade class. He goes, I know you're talking about the police stuff tonight. And he said, does Salt Lake City still run the DARE program? And I said, no, they don't actually. He goes, Officer Zane Swim changed my life. And I said, I know, I was there. And, you know, it's these types of things where you have this connection with the police department, you know, when you're growing up, that you can actually have that connection. And we don't have that, Chief. And I don't know what types of programs are out there that we can look at funding, but we need to make the officers in the community, in the schools, so that kids feel comfortable and are not afraid. I mean, I remember specifically, Zane Swim had a box that you climb up on the cabinet and ask any question. We had the most bizarre questions come out of there, but they were honest questions coming from kids that were scared of questions too. You know, I mean, they came from all over, but it's that connection that even now, like 35 years later, that I had a guy call me from my elementary school to talk about. So, you know, those are the impacts that I think that the community needs to see and needs to feel specifically right now at this time. So if you can come back and tell us what kind of programs are out there, tell us what we can look at investing in so that we can give back to the community and have that connection that the residents, I'm sure, want to feel. Because we were at a point 3 years ago where we were hearing from the communities that we needed more officers, that we needed to fund more officers. And now you're hearing the complete opposite. But I feel that connection is not happening through the communities that should be done.
That's a great.
But I'll get all my questions submitted and do that to you, Mr. Chair, as well as to Chief.
Thank you, Councilmember Rogers. Councilmember Dugan, briefly.
Chief, you talked about weapons and rubber bullets. You talked about the foam bullets. You talked about tear gas early on in this discussion. And when I look back to last Saturday night, and we had other jurisdictions come to support us, we have the lead at Salt Lake City. How do we tell the other forces, and how do you brief them and say, this is Salt Lake City's policies, this is what you do on our turf, and this is the weapons and the munitions that you can use. Because if they're bringing in their biases and their munitions that are not allowed here, how do we prevent that? Because this is your turf, and then they're spoiling your actions by doing improper deeds.
Councilmember Dugan, that's a great question. And what we've started, the conversation has already come up that we get together and form a Metro Public Order unit where we all train together. We have policies that align with each other, and our tactics are the same, because it's very difficult when everybody comes to your aid and everybody's kind of playing on from a different sheet of music. So those conversations were identified early last week, and we're moving that direction. And but that's a great question, and I'll be glad to follow up with you. I think I will get the support from the other chiefs in this valley and surrounding areas, because they want the very same thing too.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnston wanted to ask our last question. Okay.
I didn't intend to be the last question, Mr. Chair. I just forgot earlier about if we embark on some larger scale discussions through a commission, I think it's going to be critical that we have some time frames attached to it so the public can hold us accountable as well and make sure this happens. I know it's early, Mayor, and I threw out earlier 90 days, but that's really quick. What would be a more realistic time frame, or how soon could you get a sense of a time frame to get a commission like this going, to move through a process where we get to some recommendations and reports and public feedback?
Thanks, Councilmember. Rachel and I are just finishing up a draft proposal about what the commission would do, what they would perhaps look at. We don't mean to be too prescriptive about it, because there are at once really good models out there, including President Obama's 2015 work on looking into police brutality and offering suggestions. So there's models out there that have been around a long time, and then there's all of these more current or recently updated best practice conversations coming out around 8 Can't Wait, and even My Brother's Keeper has that new 4-step policy commitment that we've already committed to. So anyway, that said, we would love to do this in partnership, as Rachel mentioned earlier, with the council, because we would like this commission to be able to make suggestions that are both administrative and policy substance, which of course lays in the council realm. So in that regard, hopefully we'll be able to work together in the next couple of days to put together some leadership of the commission, and then work with them to put that body together and make other invitations to it. From there, we're still talking about volunteers. These are, unless the council wants to allocate some funding to pay people to participate, these are volunteers. And we don't want to sign them up for, an undue burden that goes on and on either. And we want these results quickly. So before we have the people at the table, I'm reluctant to say we'll have results to you in 30 days, because we need to have that conversation with the people on the commission. But obviously, time is of the essence, and we want to move as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, Councilmember Valdemoros, we have half the time remaining for our unfinished budget discussion. Please ask quickly.
To be as brief as possible, but I think it's important. We've talked about system questions, how things work, but there's one thing that I've been meaning to ask, and I'm not sure if this is the right time or not, but I feel like it is. We have certain de-escalation policies and processes, and in one instance, a very recent instance that we saw, there were police officers that were trying to do that, but it turned fatal. And so my question is, when are we going to talk about what's reasonable in terms of the use of force when we have arrests going on, or situations like we saw in a video very recently where I think the community is wondering, was that excessive or not? And I have to ask that because I understand statutes and I understand certain rules and laws that we have, but we have to have the conversation about Salt Lake City Police Department. When is it? Where is the line for us for something to de-escalate or just go fatal in this case? I don't know if that makes sense, but it makes me very nervous.
So I just remind quickly that we can't talk about the specific case until we have the report back from Unified Police Department. But Chief, do you want to talk generally about that question?
Yeah. What in general, from these situations, any officer involved critical incident, we actually, when we get the findings back, we take these situations and we take them to our training unit. Our training unit looks through these things and looks for ways that we can respond better and de-escalate sooner, or whatever we can do. If you're not learning from past experiences, then you're almost doomed to repeat them going forward. So we take those very serious. But you're absolutely right. Right now, we can't speak to it because we don't know the details of those cases. But in everything we do, Councilmember Valdemoros, I want you to know that we look to de-escalation, and we train to de-escalation, and it's our intent to always try to end these use of force situations at the lowest level. So we'll continue pushing for that. I promise you. That's our commitment. And that's the women and men, and I've said this several times, and I'll be quick, but the women and men of this police department are some of the greatest, if not the greatest, in the country, and we're committed to doing the job that needs to be done, and we'll continue to work to improve and be better in every situation.
Thank you, council members. We're now going to move on to agenda item number 6, which is unresolved budget issues for fiscal year 2020-2021. With us, we have Jennifer Bruno, the City Council Deputy Director. We had a lot of items listed under this, but there are 2 items that I think are really critical. One of which, the first being the tax levy, and then the second that a lot of council members had talked about putting some of the police department budget into a holding account. We have 20 minutes to have those 2 very important discussions. So Jennifer, good luck.
And we don't need to resolve all of that tonight. We actually just got some news while you were in your last discussion that the judgment levy raw data that we got a couple weeks ago may have caused us to believe that the judgment levy is too high. So the number we gave you before was too high. So Mary Beth thankfully is trying to work on that with the county and get some clarity on why there's a discrepancy there. But it would help staff if the council would straw poll if in concept you support a judgment levy, because the new growth figures came in and they are a little bit over the mayor's recommended budget, which is good news, about $200,000. But some of the concepts that the council is talking about, especially as it relates to adding funding to guarantee body cameras for all police officers, would exceed that amount. A judgment levy would allow for more sort of other council initiatives. So not that is the only reason you would agree to do a judgment levy, but that's one of the considerations. And it would help staff as we narrow down sort of what initiatives are realistic to fund in this year and what initiatives may have to wait for future years. There's more funds. So I don't know if you feel comfortable doing a straw poll on judgment levy tonight.
Council members, does anybody want to speak for or against the judgment levy? supporting the judgment levy? Councilmember Duke.
I'm all in favor at this point of using the judgment levy. I think it's necessary. We have some great things that we need to fund, and I think that's a great resource. I do have one question. Can we use it for the programs that Darren was mentioning? We can't use that for that programs because it's
We'll have to dig into some more detail. I believe you could. One thing to know is that to the extent that any of those programs are ongoing, this would of course be one-time money that
right. It's one-time money.
Ongoing funding. There's also a question about just in terms of wanting to put a framing around the city getting into a business that is typically not the city's business, right? And so we might want to be cautious about the process that the city goes through to do that. But that's not to say we couldn't, there's no legal barrier to doing that.
So I'm in favor of the judgment levy being assessed.
Okay, do you want to propose a straw poll?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Jennifer, usually a judgment levy means your taxes don't rise when the economy keeps going up and they keep coming in. But when it doesn't, it doesn't. So would we hit the effect of that this coming year, essentially?
So a judgment levy is a little bit different than new growth. A judgment levy actually is a property tax increase. It's a one-year, one-time property tax increase. And what it is it's paying the city back for judgments that were agreed to in the previous fiscal year. So essentially, the city was shorted money in the previous fiscal year, and this is a way where the state law allows us to increase taxes to pay ourselves back for that amount that we were shorted, which is why the amount is very exact and we can't do any more than is authorized by the county, which is why it's a little frustrating when we get different information from the county, but we're working on that.
Thanks for clarifying that, Jen. So that helps to make sure we communicate that effectively.
Yep.
So this
and what it would mean is you would have a truth and taxation hearing in August. This would trigger that.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Chair, I would make a straw poll that we accept the judgment levy for this year.
Okay, council members, that's pretty straightforward. Please show your support or opposition. Councilmember Johnston supportive, Dugan supportive, Fowler supportive, Valdemar supportive, Mana supportive, Rogers supportive. I'm supportive as well. So we'll go ahead and move forward with that.
We'll get an exact amount to you in the next day or two, hopefully.
Okay, thank you. Now we need to talk as quickly as we can about placing money in a holding account. I know that has been a big ask, or we've gotten a lot of information about asking the council to defund or restrict or take away funds from the police department. And this was something that council members brought up and has been kind of talked about widely. So I want to know if this is an area which I think our staff needs to know if this is an area that the council still wants to pursue.
And Mr. Chair, there might be a sort of on the spectrum of options. One of the options might be that some of the funds that are right now in the police department budget could be more appropriate to be managed in the non-departmental budget, where there's a little bit more transparency and visibility in terms of how they're managed. That's one of the things that staff is looking at. We don't have exact sort of proposal yet, and so I hesitate to go through that line by line, but that is one of the options. And so it would make, in addition to the holding account concept, it would make it would have a little bit more accountability for some of those funds, like for body cameras and training. So it would provide those needed items for the police department, but would be technically located in another area of the budget. Which is actually the case with fleet right now. Sorry, Councilmember Fowler, to interrupt.
Is the idea that it sort of locks the money into the intended use and can't be sort of transferred within the department?
That's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is that it establishes it as a citywide priority. It's a city priority that these body cameras are funded, and then that way, when the police department in future years is forced to come up with budget cuts, that's not one of the cut line items. That's not to say that non-departmental is insulated from cuts, as we saw with the fleet budget. I think that, you know, when budgets are tight, all kinds of things can be on the table. But what it does is it increases the visibility of that line item, and it would make that.
Okay, so what's the total amount? We had asked finance and the police department to, and I know Ben Ludke from our office was working on, like, what's the amount that could be placed on hold until we can have more discussions that would not like interrupt the current level of service?
I don't know that staff is comfortable answering that question tonight.
Okay.
We're still looking at it, and I think that to your point of not interrupting needed service, right?
Mhm.
We just want to make sure that we are respectful of the things that are needed.
So when do we think that we will have that number?
Our goal is to have that by Thursday's council meeting.
Okay. And Jennifer, it's also an option of ours to do contingent appropriations too, right? We could say, for example, that we don't want the officers to spend any money, or we don't want the department to spend any money on, say, like any guns in 2020, or something like that, right? Could we do that?
We would have to get advice from the city attorney, so I'm a little hesitant to get that level of detail, but you could say a contingent appropriation that you're appropriating the police department budget on the contingency that they amend their administrative policy, or that they report back to you with how they're going to meet the My Brother's Keeper initiative, or the 8 policy areas identified in the Campaign Zero initiative. So that way, they have the budget, it's authorized, but only if they meet the contingency that you establish in that budget ordinance.
And what about, hold on just a second. What about saying that we can't afford to give the officers more money this year, but we, instead of putting money in, this pot or towards this, we want them to use existing budget to do this?
I believe that would be an option. We would probably want to work with the administration to understand what the service impacts of that are, because there may be sort of, domino effects of that.
Okay. We had City Attorney Katie Lewis. Did you come on? Did you want to answer a specific question, or were you just coming on in case?
Council members, I was coming on in case, but I will say that the contingent appropriations are often the trickiest for us to work through. So as we hear suggestions, we'll want to work closely with council staff, because they really do, they're the gray area of administrative and legislative authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fowler.
Thank you. Excuse me, I just wanted to mention that for me, I think kind of a combination of some of the options you just mentioned, Jen, would be what I would be interested in. I like the idea of some of the things that we could put into non-departmental, if we can kind of parse that out a little bit. I know everybody's working extra double time, so, but parse out some of that budget that we could maybe put into non-departmental. I have some ideas about social workers and that I can talk offline about, as we're kind of looking at maybe reallocating some of those funds. And then so with that, the combination of then perhaps a budget with a contingency on it, and work through some of that. To me, that would be, for today, for this year's budget, as we're moving forward, something that kind of is somewhat of a compromise, but I'd like to be able to look at what that would look like.
Okay. We can put some more detail to that before Thursday's meeting.
Other questions? Councilmember Johnston.
I'm not opposed. I think I'm erring more on the side of not the contingency, but the holding account, because for me, there's just so many questions, from things like we brought up earlier, the parks ranger concept. Is that going to stay in police, or we're going to try and pull that out? clear to all the things we've talked about today. I'm just not sure I have enough information to know where we would need money if we have in the short term this year. So I'm sort of hesitant to go with the contingency as much as just a holding account with some maybe intent on our part about where we would like to be looking at, like what Amy said a second ago.
And we can work with them on that.
Okay, council members, other discussion points here?
So staff will send a revised list, this sort of tracking sheet that you've seen before of line by line revenue ideas and expense ideas. And we'll send that to you hopefully tomorrow in advance of Thursday's meeting, so that at Thursday's meeting, we can tick through and hopefully balance the budget. Fingers crossed.
Okay. We have still 9 minutes to talk about unresolved budget issues. If people don't have any other questions about this, we can either move to the next item or we can address the third most important thing under unfinished business or unresolved issues. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I think given the outstanding questions, it might be fine to wrap up the conversation and go to the next items.
Okay. Are our nominees ready? Are interviewees ready?
I texted them to let them know they may be early, so.
Okay. So do we have Lisa Schaefer?
Yeah.
Yay.
Hi, I'm here.
Hi.
Hi.
Lisa, we'll go ahead and move on to agenda item number 7, which is advice and consent for the Salt Lake City Chief Administrative Officer. The
Are you not gonna wear a tie or what?
position created by the mayor. And the nominee for that is Lisa Schaefer. So does anybody have questions for Lisa? Councilmember Rogers.
What do you do? Let everybody know exactly what your position does.
Oh, thanks. The hardest question right off the bat. I had like this little speech prepared that was more emotional.
What's going on over there?
Yeah, really. What the heck is going on over there?
Actually,
you know, thank you. Oh, ties in support. We're very formal over here today. So yeah,
well, sorry, Lisa, do you want to give your speech first?
Yeah, I do want to give my little speech first,
Okay,
but thank you,
ahead.
Councilmember Rogers, for
Sorry.
putting me on the spot like that. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, thank you very much, council members. It is, in all seriousness, an incredible honor to present myself today for your consent to be Mayor Mendenhall's choice for Chief Administrative Officer. When I left the private sector about 15 years ago and I entered into a life of public service, I had no idea what was ahead of me. I only knew that I was making that choice because I wanted to make a positive contribution to the world. All of these years later, they can hear you. All of these years later, all of these years later, I know that I chose the right path. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Diligently serving the community I live in, listening and responding, caring deeply about the people I serve, solving problems as they arise and cutting through problems to get things done. And I love this city. I love Salt Lake City. It's my home. And these are my positive contributions that I'm finding myself making. And what an incredible privilege that is to contribute in this way and also have it be my job. That's a privilege, that's an honor. So I also want you to know that the departments of this city are filled with people who care. I'm a very small part of a huge team of talented and dedicated people who love this city as much as I do. What an incredible honor to work on this team. Those who know me know that I take my role as a public servant very seriously, even though I'm a ham 100% of the time and I joke about everything. I take my role as a public servant very seriously because not only am I an employee of the citizens of Salt Lake City, I'm also a tax-paying resident. So when citizens call me with a complaint or a concern, I can definitely relate. And when a citizen calls me to compliment us on the great work that we do every day, which happens, by the way, far more often than we advertise, I feel a tremendous amount of pride. my incredible partner, who also happens to be my wife, and I work here. We spend money in this community. We support local causes. We pay taxes here, and our daughter attends public school here. Go Panthers!
Yeah.
Woo!
Panthers for life.
I couldn't be prouder to serve this community. With your consent, I would love to continue to serve this city as Salt Lake City's Chief Administrative Officer. I humbly ask for your support and would be happy to take any questions that you have.
So Councilmember Rogers had a question. You can start with that.
Sound good? I'm sorry you ruined it at the beginning.
Yes, Lisa, he asked you to answer my question.
Okay, all right. I just, I'm coasting towards retirement, Councilmember Rogers. I think I answered that. It's actually an incredible role. Being the Chief Administrative Officer is fairly new. It's new again to the city. We haven't had a Chief Administrative Officer in the city since 2008. My job is really, if you think about the mayor as kind of being right in between outwardly facing issues and all of the inwardly facing issues, I'm the inward facing. So I'm handling all of the department level issues, all of the operational stuff, directing and supporting, encouraging changes where necessary to all of the operations of the city. And at some point, when we stop having a bunch of emergencies, we're going to get to the really awesome business of identifying and implementing some improvements to some things that we've already identified. So I hope that answers your question. I'm sorry to be a little bit flippant. Thanks, Councilmember Rogers.
My question is, you've been acting Chief Administrative Officer for 6 months now, and we've had an earthquake and a pandemic, and we've had a lot of other issues in our city, unrest, civil unrest in our city. I mean, other than dealing with those, what qualifies you to do this job?
Yeah, it's been a piece of cake, really, and I've been wondering when things are going to get hard, because
yeah, sure.
It's been pretty easy sailing so far, and I think the mayor and Rachel can kind of chime in here on how they feel about it's like they come into city government and it's just like, oh, I thought this was going to be hard. So no, what qualifies me for this job? So I've most recently served, and I hope you have my resume, as the Public Services Director for Salt Lake City for a few years. Prior to that, I was a deputy in the Public Services Department. I've worked for the city for 15 years in various capacities in community and economic development that is now community and neighborhoods. I started out actually doing plans examining in the city. And I also implemented a bunch of software that gave me the exposure to every single process that we have in the city. And so it kind of situated me perfectly to understand how we do what we do. And I think it's a really interesting organism, this city. It's a very, very complex organism. And we have to understand all of those different parts that make us tick in order to be efficient at that, at running the city and responding to the citizens and providing the services that they pay for. So.
All right, thank you. Other questions? Councilmember Fowler.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that Lisa was probably one of the first or close to the first people I met when I was first elected. And I knew immediately that we would be friends because I'm pretty sure we both made some sarcastic comment and was like, well, I guess that solidifies things. And when you said, sorry to be flippant, I thought to myself, wait, it wouldn't be Lisa Schaefer if she wasn't being flippant right now.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
but besides that, you've done amazing work when I saw you in your capacity as the director and the way that you supported your department and your teams. It was obvious that the respect from that department was there across the board, both from you and from your team to you. And I look forward to continue working with you in this capacity. And if anyone's going to run all those departments, I'm glad it's going to be you. So I'm excited for you. And I think this is great. And I think it's a good step for the city. So good job, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Fowler.
Okay, any other questions for Lisa Schaefer? Okay, then I would propose a straw poll that we support nomination of Lisa Schaefer to the position of Chief Administrative Officer and place that on the consent or on the agenda for formal adoption at tonight's meeting. Any discussion or questions?
Did you do it?
Your support. Councilmember Johnston.
Are they saying nice things about you?
Yeah, they're giving me a thumbs up right now.
Councilmember Johnston, Fowler, Valdemoros, Dugan, Mono, all indicating support. We're holding out for Councilmember Rogers, who is a yes. I, of course, am a yes as well. Thank you, Lisa. You do need to be present to win. I am going to require you to listen to the formal meeting.
I will be there. I will definitely be there tonight. I'm going to have my camera off because I put on a blouse. It's a blouse, not a t-shirt. So I'm going to go change out of that, put my t-shirt back on, but I'll be present. I'll be present.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn the metaphorical gavel over to Councilmember Johnston, who's going to take us through the rest of the council work session. I got to sign off early so I can get home, and I'll see you all in about 30 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson Wharton. Our next advice and consent agenda item 8, Aaron Bentley, who has been considering for the appointment as the Salt Lake City Chief Information Officer, aka Director of Information Management Services, or IMS. I do believe, yes, there he is.
Thank you.
I also, if I'm not mistaken, it said on here that you've been the acting director for 20 months.
Yeah, I've had a little practice.
All right. Well, I guess tell us why you would want to do this formally then after 20 months.
Sure. I've been working for the city for 19 years. And if you've seen my resume, I've had a chance to work in pretty much all the departments of the city and implement technology. Many of my early years were standing on a box in the council chambers filming you all. So I think Cindy, Gus, and I are the only ones that have those memories together, but it's been a great journey. I think the mayor thinks I'm a little crazy. I'm pretty passionate about technology and especially digital equity. And I have a big dream that instead of having digital divide, we can change it into digital unity and address many of the issues that you've talked about today. So I love the city, spent many days as a child walking the streets of the city and visiting family. So the city means a lot to me. I never thought I'd be a government employee, but I'm very glad that I am, and just humbled to represent the city and its technology interests and the good women and men that I get to interact with on a daily basis. So that's why I'm willing to do this, because I love it and very supportive of the council, and I know supportive of the mayor. I know that she has a great vision, and I support her vision fully and want to be a part of it. So.
Excellent. I'm open up to the council members now. Any questions or comments? Everyone is just so excited for you.
Yeah, I can tell.
I'm very excited for you. I love folks who have served so long and move up and can sort of implement a vision, and you have that. So thank you very much, Aaron.
Thank you.
I'm not going to mandate you have to stick around for the entire evening tonight. I'm kind.
Yeah, it's my anniversary, so my wife will be thankful as well.
Happy anniversary to y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's the last agenda item for our work session, or am I missing something here? Silence means yes. Okay, excellent. So here's what we're going to do then. We are going to end our work session and reconvene at 7 p.m. on the dot for the formal session tonight. Unless anybody else has anything else they need to bring up. All right. See y'all in half an hour.